They say there are 10,000 ways to die in the Imperium of Man, but standing in the dropship bay of the righteous fury, watching the agri-world of Graia's harvest spin below us like a green jewel against the void, I only knew one truth. Guardsmen don't get to choose how they go. We just pray the Emperor makes it quick. My name is Corvus Deal, and I'm a corporal in the 114th Cadian Shock Troops, or what's left of us after Cadia fell. They reassigned the survivors across a dozen regiments, but we Cadians, we remember. We keep the purple uniform. We keep the standards. We keep fighting, because that's what we were born to do. This is what it's like to be an Imperial Guardsman facing Tyranids. And if you want to hear more stories from the front lines of humanity's endless war, do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe button. The Emperor protects those who stand together, and this channel brings you the tales they don't teach in the Schola Progenium. The dropship's deck plates vibrated under my boots as our Valkyrie prepared for atmospheric entry. Around me, 37 faces, some barely old enough to shave, others weathered like the rockcrete bunkers of Cadia itself. Check their laser guns for the 100th time. It's what you do when you're nervous. It's what you do when command won't tell you why an entire agri-world has gone dark for 6 standard days. "Corporal Deal!" Trooper Max called over the engine roar, his voice cracking. Fresh from the Schola, this one. 3 months in the Guard and still thought last packs could solve every problem. They're saying the Vox arrays just failed. Equipment malfunction, right? I met his eyes and saw what I'd seen in every young Guardsman's face before their first real deployment. Hope. Foolish, dangerous hope that the universe made sense. That there were reasonable explanations for why an entire planet's population of 6 million just stopped transmitting. Could be, I lied, because it wasn't my job to break him before the enemy did. That privilege belonged to reality. Sergeant Harrow moved through the bay with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd survived 23 campaigns. His augmetic left eye, courtesy of an orc choppa on Armageddon, scanned each trooper's kit with mechanical precision. Last packs charged, bayonets fixed, flak armor sealed. We're hitting the ground in 5, and I want every one of you ready to move the moment the ramp drops. "Sergeant," I said quietly as he passed my position, "any word on what happened to the 88th? The 88th Vostroyan Firstborn had been first response. Dropped onto Graia's harvest 4 days ago to investigate the communications blackout. Their last transmission had been 3 words: contact, require reinfor, then static. Harrow's organic eye found mine, and in it I saw something that made my stomach clench. Not fear, Harrow didn't do fear, but recognition. He'd seen this before, whatever this was. The 88th went silent 12 hours after landing, he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. 600 men, Corporal, experienced troops. They didn't panic, didn't scatter, didn't call for extraction. They just stopped. The deck lurched as we hit Graia's atmosphere. Through the viewport, I could see vast agricultural fields stretching to the horizon, golden grains swaying in winds that should have been stirred by harvester machinery, by ground vehicles, by the daily business of feeding a hungry Imperium. Instead, there was only the wind. "1 minute," the pilot's voice crackled over the Vox. "LZ is clear. No hostile contacts. No contacts at all." That's when I smelled it, even through the Valkyrie's sealed atmosphere, even over the stink of 40 unwashed soldiers and recycled air. A smell like rotting meat left in summer sun, like something organic breaking down, being consumed, being repurposed into something else entirely. Trooper Vess, a squat woman from the Catechin contingent who'd somehow ended up in Arcadian squad, wrinkled her nose. "That's not equipment failure," she said, racking the slide on her laser gun with a sound like a promise. "That's biomass." The word hung in the air like a curse. Sergeant Harrow's Vox bead chirped. He listened, his jaw tightening with each passing second. When he looked up at us, his face was carved from granite. "Change of plans. Command says the 88th's last known position is 4 clicks northeast of our LZ. We're to investigate, report, and establish a perimeter for follow-on forces." "Investigate what, Sergeant?" Max asked. The Valkyrie's assault ramp began to lower, and that smell rolled in like a physical thing, thick and cloying and wrong. Below us, the landing zone was a flat expanse of trampled grain, beside a supply depot. The depot's lights were on, the doors were open, but nothing moved except the wheat. Whatever killed 600 Vostroyans without a single distress call, Harrow said, mag-locking his laser gun and stepping toward the ramp. Squad leaders, on me. We deploy by the book. Fire teams staggered, overlapping fields of fire. Nobody goes anywhere alone. I checked my laser gun one last time. 40-shot charge pack, full load. 3 spares on my webbing, mono knife on my hip, frag grenades, flak armor that might stop a stub round but wouldn't do much against anything serious. Standard issue for the Emperor's expendable infantry. The ramp touched down with a hydraulic hiss, and we moved out into the golden afternoon of Graya's harvest. The sun was warm, the sky was blue, the fields stretched forever, and somewhere in them, 600 trained soldiers had vanished like they'd never existed at all. I took point with Sergeant Harrow, my laser gun sweeping the grain line while my heart hammered against my ribs. Behind us, the Valkyrie's engines screamed back to life, lifting off to orbit because dropships don't wait around to become targets. We were alone now, 38 guardsmen on a silent world that should have held millions. And in the distance, just at the edge of hearing, something moved through the wheat fields with a sound like 1,000 knives being sharpened. The supply depot should have been our first clue that something was fundamentally wrong with Graya's harvest. Not just wrong, perverted. The kind of wrong that makes your hindbrain scream warnings your conscious mind doesn't want to acknowledge. Sergeant Harrow raised a fist, and our column halted 20 meters from the depot's main entrance. The building was a standard Imperial prefab, reinforced rockcrete, triple-sealed doors designed to keep out vermin and weather, auto turrets on the corners that should have challenged us the moment we approached. The turrets tracked our movement with mechanical precision, their targeting arrays glowing green, active, powered. But they didn't fire, didn't query our authorization codes, didn't do anything except watch us with the dead attention of machines following a protocol nobody had updated. Vess, Coleman, with me, I ordered, gesturing to the Catechin and a wire-thin trooper from the Talon contingent. Max, you're on overwatch. Anyone comes through that grain line that isn't us, you light them up and scream for the sergeant. Max nodded, his laser gun trained on the swaying wheat. The wind had picked up, creating waves across the fields that looked disturbingly like something moving beneath the surface. But it was just wind. Had to be just wind. We approached the depot in a textbook advance, 2 covering while 1 moved, angles overlapping, eyes scanning every shadow and corner. The closer we got, the stronger that rotting smell became. Not the clean decay of a single corpse, but something massive, something industrial in scale. The depot doors were open, not forced, just open, like someone had walked through and forgotten to close them behind them. Through the entrance, I could see stacks of supply crates, ration containers marked with the Administratum's eagle, fuel drums arranged in neat rows, and blood. So much blood it had pooled in the low spots of the rockcrete floor, dried to a brown crust that cracked under our boots as we entered. Emperor preserve us, Coleman whispered, his Talon accent thickening with stress. His laser gun swept the interior, finger tight on the trigger. Corporal, this isn't just a few casualties. This is a massacre, Vess finished, her jungle-trained eyes reading the scene like a death-shrouded book. She pointed to the walls where last burns had scorched the rockcrete in wild, panicked patterns. They fought here, defensive positions all facing the wrong direction. I followed her gesture and felt ice crawl down my spine. The last burns, the overturned crates, the defensive barricades hastily erected from supply containers, all of it faced inward, toward the center of the depot, like they'd been trying to keep something from getting out, not in. Vox check, I sub-vocalized into my comm bead. Sergeant Harrow, you reading this? Static hissed in my ear for 3 heartbeats before Harrow's voice cut through. Barely, Corporal. We're getting interference. Auspex is showing strange readings. Biological signatures, but the pattern's wrong. Too dense. Too unified. Unified. The word echoed in my head as I moved deeper into the depot. Vess had found something near the back wall. A Vox station, its screen still glowing with the last message someone had tried to send. I leaned over her shoulder to read, Emergency transmission. 88th Volstroyan, firstborn to any Imperial forces. Graya's harvest compromised. Population not evacuated. Consumed Xenos contact. Tyranid vanguard organisms. Confirmed hive fleet designation unknown. Synapse creatures active recommend. Immediate exterminatus. Planet is lost for the Emperor and the Imperium. We stand until... The message ended mid-sentence. The timestamp showed it had been sent 73 hours ago. Corporal. Coleman's voice was tight, controlled, the sound of a man keeping terror at bay through sheer discipline. You need to see this. He was standing by a cargo container that had been torn open from the inside, not cut with tools or blown apart with explosives, torn with marks that looked disturbingly organic. Inside the container, what I'd taken for spilled rations resolved into something else entirely. Biomass. Wet, glistening purple-gray tissue that pulsed with a rhythm that matched no Imperial machinery. It was growing up the walls, spreading across the floor in fibrous tendrils, converting everything it touched into more of itself. And in the center of the mass, suspended like insects in amber, were shapes that might have once been human. Back, I breathed, raising my lasgun. Everyone back now. The biomass moved, not the slow growth of fungus or mold, but a deliberate contraction, like a muscle flexing. The shapes inside twisted, and I saw with horrible clarity that they weren't dead bodies. They were still alive, still conscious, their mouths open in screams that no longer had air to voice them. Vess grabbed my webbing and hauled me backward. Run! We ran. The depot's walls shook as something massive shifted in the darkness beyond the supply crates. I heard Sergeant Harrow screaming orders over the Vox. Heard lasguns opening fire outside. Heard a sound that was part shriek and part chittering hunger that made every instinct in my body scream wrong. Wrong, wrong. We burst through the depot entrance into chaos. The wheat fields had erupted with movement. Hundreds of creatures the size of large dogs. Their carapaces the color of deep space bruises. Their limbs too many and moving too fast. Hormagaunts, my training whispered. Tyranid shock troops, fast, vicious, and designed for one purpose. Overwhelming through sheer numbers. Our platoon had formed a firing line. Lasguns snapping out last bolts and disciplined volleys that cut down the first wave. But for every creature that fell, 3 more surged forward through the wheat, their claws leaving furrows in the earth, their mouths full of teeth that could shear through flak armor like parchment. Concentrate fire, Harrow bellowed, his voice cutting through the chaos. Volley fire by squads. First squad loose. 20 lasguns spoke as one, and a wall of coherent light carved a corridor of death through the charging swarm. Hormagaunts exploded, their ichor spraying across the wheat. But they didn't stop, didn't hesitate, didn't care about casualties. They just kept coming. The Emperor teaches that courage is not the absence of fear, but the will to stand despite it. In the next 3 minutes, I learned the difference between textbook courage and the raw, screaming terror of watching an alien tide that doesn't care how many of them you kill. Second squad, loose! Sergeant Harrow's command cut through the shrieking of the Hormagaunts. Another volley tore through the swarm. I fired with the rhythm drilled into every Cadian from birth. Aim, squeeze, acquire next target, repeat. My lasgun grew hot in my hands, the power pack's charge indicator dropping with each shot. Beside me, Trooper Max was firing so fast his shots were going wide, panic overriding his training. Max, controlled bursts! I grabbed his shoulder, forced him to meet my eyes. You're Cadian now. We don't break, understood? He nodded, terror still written across his face, but his next shots were centered, disciplined. Good. He'd either die a guardsman or live long enough to become one. The Hormagaunts hit our line like a living tsunami. The first one reached Trooper Venn from 3rd Squad. I watched its scything talons punch through his flak armor and out his back in a spray of red. He didn't even have time to scream before 3 more were on him, tearing him apart with mechanical efficiency. Bayonets! Harrow roared, and 37 monoblades snapped into place on our lasguns. Hold the line! They crashed into us, and the world became nothing but stabbing, shooting, and trying not to die. I put my bayonet through a Hormagaun's eye socket, felt the blade scrape against the inside of its skull before I twisted and tore it free. Last fire scorched the air around me. Something's claw raked across my flak armor, leaving deep gouges that would have disemboweled me if the armor had been one grade lower. Vess fought like a Catechin devil, her monoknife in one hand and last pistol in the other, each movement economical and brutal. She stabbed upward into soft joints, shot point blank into open mouths, used every dirty jungle fighting trick her death world had taught her. Fall back by squads! Harrow was bleeding from a gash across his forehead, but his augmetic eye tracked the battlefield with inhuman precision. Third squad, covering fire. First squad, bound back 20 meters. We retreated in good order, the kind of fighting withdrawal that separated trained Imperial Guard from conscript militia. One squad fired while the other moved, leapfrogging back toward the depot's stronger defensive position. The Hormagaunts pressed us hard, but their numbers were finally thinning. Bodies lay scattered across the trampled wheat, purple ichor mixing with human blood in the dirt. Then I saw them, beyond the swarm, moving through the wheat with terrible purpose. Larger shapes, Tyranid warriors, each one 3 meters tall, their carapaces thicker than our flak armor, their heads crowned with bony crests that marked them as synapse creatures. The ones that controlled the swarm, the ones that made the mindless Hormagaunts into a coordinated killing force. And they were looking at us with intelligence that no animal should possess. Warriors, someone screamed, and I realized it was me. Synapse creatures at 270. Harrow's organic eye followed my pointing finger, and I watched his expression shift from grim determination to cold calculation. He knew what I knew, what every guardsman learned in xenology briefs. Kill the synapse creatures, and the lesser bioforms lose coordination. Let them live, and the swarm fights like a single organism with 1,000 bodies. Coleman, Vess, deal! Harrow grabbed us as we bounded back past his position. I need a fire team on those warriors. Target practice for anyone who can put shots on target at 200 meters. Sergeant, that's suicide, Coleman said, but he was already checking his lace gun's charge. 3/4 remaining. Enough for maybe 30 shots if we were conservative. Then die well, Harrow said, and there was something almost gentle in his scarred face. Buy us time to fortify the depot. If those synapse creatures coordinate a proper assault, we're dead anyway. He was right. We all knew he was right. That's the thing about being a guardsman. Sometimes the choice isn't between living and dying. It's between dying uselessly or dying for something that might let your brothers in arms survive another hour. Emperor's mercy, I muttered, and the three of us broke from the retreating platoon, angling left through the wheat field toward a small rise that would give us firing position on the warriors. We moved fast and low, using every fold in the terrain, every shadow. Behind us, the main platoon reached the depot and began setting up overlapping fields of fire. Ahead, the Tyranid warriors stalked forward with the confidence of apex predators who knew they couldn't be stopped. We dropped prone at the rise, wheat stalks forming a natural blind. 200 meters. Long range for a laser gun, but not impossible. Not if you were Cadian, trained since birth to put shots on target. Vess, left target, I whispered. Coleman, center. I've got right. Aim for the head crest. It's thinner armor, and if we're lucky, we'll scramble whatever passes for their brain. And if we're unlucky, Vess asked, then we die here instead of in the depot. At least the view's better. She snorted, actual laughter in the face of certain death. That's when I knew she was truly Catechin. They don't breed cowards on death worlds. I sighted down my laser gun, finding the rightmost warrior's head crest in my iron sights. The creature was massive up close, all chitinous plates and corded alien muscle. It carried a weapon that looked disturbingly like a laser gun, but grown rather than manufactured. Bioweapons. Another horror the Tyranids brought to the galaxy. On my mark, I breathed. 3, 2, 1. Mark. 3 laser guns spoke as one. 3 last bolts crossed 200 meters in perfect synchronization. 3 heads snapped back as superheated energy carved through alien bone and tissue. 2 of the warriors dropped like puppets with cut strings. Mine staggered, its crest shattered, but it didn't fall. Instead, it turned those terrible eyes directly toward our position, and I felt something brush against my mind. a presence vast and hungry and utterly alien. Move! Vess was already scrambling to her feet as the warrior raised its bioweapon. It's locked on. The weapon spat something that looked like living projectiles, each one a tiny organism bred for one purpose, burrowing into flesh and exploding. They hit where we'd been lying, and the earth erupted in acid and shrapnel. We ran through the wheat, and behind us, I heard the warriors shriek, a sound that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. A call to the swarm, a promise of revenge. And in the distance, the wheat fields began to move again. They say the Tyranids don't hate. They don't feel rage or revenge or any emotion a human mind could comprehend. They're a galaxy-devouring, hunger-given form, as impersonal as a storm or a plague. But running through that wheat field with Vess and Coleman, hearing that wounded warrior's shriek echo across the plains, I swear to the Golden Throne it sounded like fury. "Depot! Make for the depot!" I screamed into my vox bead, though Harrow could surely hear the weapons fire and the chittering swarm that had erupted from every corner of the field. We'd kicked the hive, and now it was coming for us with everything it had. Coleman's breathing was ragged over the squad channel. He was Talon, bred for desert warfare, not endurance sprints through hostile terrain. But he kept pace, his legs pumping, his laser gun clutched across his chest. Behind us, the wheat exploded as hormagaunts burst from concealment, their talons churning the earth into furrows as they closed the distance with horrifying speed. 50 meters, Vess called out, her catechin conditioning showing. She wasn't even winded. "Harrow, we're coming in hot. Clear a corridor." "Weapons free on Sector 4. Harrow's voice crackled. "All squads, suppressing fire." The depot's defenders opened up, a wall of las fire that turned the air above our heads into a deadly light show. Hormagaunts disintegrated mid-leap. Others stumbled, their legs blown out from under them, but more kept coming, flowing around their fallen like water around stones. I heard it before I saw it, a deeper sound beneath the chittering, like a bass note thrumming through the ground itself. Something massive was moving through the wheat behind us, something that made the hormagaunts seem like scouts, like the small creatures you sent ahead to test your prey's defenses before committing your real strength. "Don't look back," I shouted, because I knew if we turned to see what was coming, we'd lose the precious seconds that meant the difference between reaching the depot alive or dying in the open. 30 meters. 20. The depot's walls loomed ahead, and I could see our brothers manning firing positions, their laser guns spitting defiance at the swarm. Max was there on the corner, his young face set in grim determination as he poured fire into the pursuing mass. 10 meters. A hormagaunt leaped over its fellows airborne, its talons extended for my back. I heard Vess scream a warning, heard the snap crack of her last pistol, and the creature fell away shrieking. 5 meters. We crossed the threshold into the depot's loading bay, and immediately hands grabbed us, hauling us behind cover as Sergeant Harrow roared, "Seal the doors!" 2 troopers threw their weight against the heavy blast doors. The servos engaged with a grinding whine, ancient machinery protesting as it dragged tons of reinforced steel across the entrance. A hormagaunt tried to force its way through the closing gap, and Harrow put 3 last rounds through its skull at point-blank range, kicking the twitching body back outside. The doors slammed shut with a boom that echoed through the depot like a funeral bell. Locking bolts engaged. The tactical display above the entrance showed the door's integrity at 93%. Good but not perfect. Nothing in the Imperium was perfect except the Emperor's vision, and even that had cost him everything. For 3 blessed seconds there was silence, except for our ragged breathing and the whine of overheated laser guns cooling. Then the impacts began. Hundreds of bodies throwing themselves against the blast doors, claws scrabbling at steel, that inhuman chittering rising to a fever pitch. "Sound off," Harrow commanded, his voice hoarse. "Casualties." 3rd squad, 3 dead, 2 wounded, Corporal Ven's replacement reported. Ven's body was still out there in the wheat, being consumed by the planet itself. 2nd squad, 1 dead, 4 wounded. Jensen lost his arm at the elbow. We've got him stabilized. 1st squad, I did a quick count of the faces around me. 23 when we deployed, now 18. 5 dead, all effectives mobile. Harrow's jaw tightened. 15 dead in less than 20 minutes. At this rate, the 114th Cadian wouldn't last the day. Medic, triage the wounded. Everyone else, fortify this position. I want firing steps on every wall, overlapping fields of fire, and someone get me a Vox link to orbit. We need extraction or reinforcement, and we need it now. Trooper Max appeared at my elbow, his hands shaking as he fumbled with a fresh charge pack. Corporal, what was that sound? At the end, when you were running back, that deep sound. I'd been trying not to think about it, trying not to remember the xenology briefings I'd sat through after Cadia fell, when they'd rushed us survivors through accelerated training to face the galaxy's infinite horrors. Carnifex, I said quietly. Maybe, or a Trigon if we're really unlucky. Big Tyranid bioform, designed for breaking fortifications. Can we stop it? I looked at him, this boy who'd probably lied about his age to join the Guard, who'd made it through basic training only to be thrown into a meat grinder on a dying world. He deserved honesty, even if it would break him. Not with laser guns, I said. We'd need heavy weapons. Lascannons, maybe autocannons. We've got last fire and frag grenades. It's like fighting a tank with harsh language. Vess joined us, wiping purple ichor from her blade. Then we get creative. Tyranids are tough, but they're still biological. They burn, they bleed, and they can be killed if you're willing to pay the price. Coleman staggered over, collapsing against a supply crate. His desert-pattern fatigues were soaked with sweat, and his hands trembled as he reached for his canteen. The warriors, he panted. When you shot them, Corporal, I felt something. In my head, like fingers reaching through my skull. I'd felt it too, that alien presence, vast and incomprehensibly other, brushing against my consciousness. The hive mind, the gestalt intelligence that connected every Tyranid organism into a single galaxy-spanning entity. Synapse, I confirmed. They coordinate through psychic resonance. Kill enough synapse creatures, and the lesser bioforms revert to animal behavior. Dangerous but manageable. Let them keep the network intact, and they fight like they share one brain. So we need to kill the big ones, Max said, trying to sound confident. Target the warriors, break their control. Before I could respond, the Vox station crackled to life with a burst of static. Harrow was there instantly, adjusting frequencies, trying to punch through the interference that seemed to blanket the entire region. Diane Forces, this is Firebase Throne. We read your emergency beacon. Be advised, orbital surveyors are showing massive biosignatures converging on your position. Estimate, Emperor's Mercy, estimates 60,000 plus contacts and rising. 60,000. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. We had 33 effectives, limited ammunition, and no heavy weapons. Firebase Throne, this is Sergeant Harrow, 114th Cadian. Request immediate extraction for wounded and resupply for remaining effectives. We can hold if we get support. The pause before the response told me everything I needed to know. Negative, Sergeant. All extraction craft are committed to evacuation of command elements from the capital. You are ordered to hold your position and delay enemy advance by any means necessary. Reinforcements inbound. Estimate 4 hours. 4 hours. We'd be dead in one. Harrow's face was carved from stone. Understood, Firebase Throne. The 114th will hold. For Cadia? For Cadia, the voice echoed, and I heard the weight of those words. The acknowledgement that we were already ghosts, already written off, dead men who just didn't know it yet. Harrow cut the Vox and turned to face us. The remnants of his platoon, bloodied but unbroken. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of every Cadian who'd ever stood against impossible odds. You heard the man. We hold for 4 hours. That means we make every shot count, every grenade matter. Every second we survive buys time for the Imperium. We are Cadian. Our world fell, but we did not. Today, we show these Xenos monsters what that means. Around the depot, laser guns were checked, charge packs distributed, firing positions reinforced with whatever we could find. The wounded who could still hold a weapon took positions at the walls. Those who couldn't loaded magazines and prepared medical supplies for casualties that were coming. And outside, in the fading afternoon light of Graia's harvest, That deep thrumming sound was getting closer. The thing about waiting for death is that your mind won't let you simply accept it. Even when you know, truly know that you're going to die, some stubborn part of your brain keeps planning, keeps fighting, keeps pretending there's a way out. I found myself on the depot's second level, helping Vess and Coleman set up a firing position that overlooked the main approach. Through the reinforced viewport, I could see the wheat fields in the dying light, and what I saw made my mouth go dry. The fields were moving, not individual creatures running through the grain, but the entire landscape rippling like muscle tissue, undulating with the passage of something massive beneath the surface. The wheat itself was changing color, turning from gold to a sickly purple-gray, where the biomass had begun converting it into tyranid matter. We weren't just fighting an army. We were fighting a planet being digested alive. "Corporal," Coleman said quietly, his Talaran reserve finally cracking. "We're not getting out of this, are we?" I could have lied, should have lied maybe, but we were beyond that now. "No," I said, "we're not." "Then why are we doing this? Why not, I don't know, make peace with the Emperor now? On our terms?" Vess drove her monoknife into a wooden crate with enough force to bury it to the hilt. "Because guardsmen don't quit, Desert Boy. We die standing or we don't die at all." She yanked the blade free. "Besides, 4 hours buys time for someone else to live. Maybe some scared kid gets evacuated because we held here. Maybe some general gets his staff to orbit and coordinates a defense that actually works. We don't get to know. We just hold." She was right, of course. That's what being a guardsman meant. Dying so someone else might live. Fighting battles you'd never see won. Being a single laser gun in a war that would span millennia. The Imperium didn't run on heroes. It ran on billions of ordinary people doing their duty, even when that duty was a death sentence. The Vox crackled. Harrow's voice. "All units. Auspex is picking up concentrated movement. Whatever's under those fields is coming up. 60 seconds. Prepare to engage." I checked my laser gun for the 100th time. 2 charge packs remaining after the one currently loaded. Maybe 120 shots total if I was conservative. Against 60,000 Tyranids, I could kill 120, and it wouldn't matter at all. But I'd make those 120 count. The ground trembled. Dust sifted from the depot's ceiling, pattering down like gray snow. The trembling became shaking, then a full earthquake that rattled my teeth and made the viewport crack in spiderweb patterns. Then it burst from the earth. I'd seen pictures in the xenology briefings, grainy pic captures and artist renderings that tried to convey the horror of a Tyranid trigon. They didn't do it justice. Nothing could. It erupted from the ground like a serpent of chitin and muscle, easily 40 meters long, its segmented body as thick as a Lehman Russ battle tank. The head was all teeth and sensory tendrils, eyes that glowed with bioluminescence, mandibles that could shear through tank armor like it was parchment. It rose up, impossibly up, until it towered over the depot like a living siege engine. Behind it, the tunnel it had created vomited forth a stream of smaller bioforms. Hormagaunts, termagants with flesh-borer weapons, larger forms I couldn't identify. The swarm had found a way in. Now they were coming from below, above, and every angle at once. "Open fire!" Harrow's command was almost lost in the Trigon's shriek, a sound like metal tearing, like worlds dying, like every nightmare humanity had ever dreamed. Every lace gun in the depot opened up simultaneously. Last bolts by the hundreds slammed into the Trigon's carapace, scorching chitin, burning through armor plates. It should have killed it. Would have killed anything else. The Trigon didn't even slow down. It crashed into the depot's north wall like a battering ram, and I felt the entire structure shudder. Reinforced rockcrete cracked. Support beams groaned. The wall held, but I could see fresh cracks spreading from the impact point like frozen lightning. "Sector North, concentrate fire." Harrow was bleeding from his nose now. The psychic pressure from so many synapse creatures was affecting even those without psychic sensitivity. "Aim for the joints between the armor plates." I followed his orders, sighting on the segments where the Trigon's armor met. My first shot went wide. The creature was moving too fast, coiling and striking like a snake. My second found a gap and burned into soft tissue. Purple ichor sprayed, and the Trigon's shriek pitched higher. Beside me, Vess and Coleman poured fire into the same weak point, widening the wound. Other troopers across the depot had the same idea, focusing their fire on exposed segments. The Trigon's ichor flowed freely now, steaming in the cool evening air. But it wasn't enough. The creature smashed into the wall again, and this time I heard the groan of failing structural supports. The wall wouldn't hold for a third impact. "Grenades!" I screamed, pulling a frag from my webbing. Around the depot, other troopers did the same. We armed them in unison, counted down, and threw. A dozen explosives arced through the air. Most bounced off the Trigon's armor, detonating harmlessly. But three, blessed Emperor, three, fell directly into the gaping wound we'd created. They tumbled down into the creature's body cavity before exploding. The Trigon convulsed, its entire body seizing. More ichor erupted from the wound, along with chunks of internal organs I had no names for. It crashed to the earth, twitching, its mandibles clacking weakly as its nervous system misfired. For one heartbeat, I thought we'd actually killed it. Then the smaller bioforms swarmed over their fallen titan, and I realized they were feeding on it, consuming its biomass, recycling its matter back into the swarm. In death, it would birth 100 more killers. "They're at the doors!" Max's voice high with panic. On the ground level, Hormagaunts had reached the blast doors and were tearing at them with focused intensity. The door integrity dropped to 87%, then 83. Harrow appeared in my peripheral vision, his face grim. "Corporal Deal, I need you on the ground level. If those doors fail, we need someone who can organize a fighting withdrawal to the inner depot. Sergeant, if the doors fail, there is no withdrawal. This entire structure becomes a tomb. Then we make it the kind of tomb that buries the Emperor's enemies with us." He grabbed my shoulder, and for just a moment, his mask of command slipped. I saw the man beneath, exhausted, terrified, but still standing, still fighting. "We're Cadian, Corporal. We may be the last Cadians in this sector. Let's remind the galaxy what that means." I clasped his arm in the old Cadian way, forearm to forearm, brothers in all but blood. The planet broke before the Guard did, and we didn't break then either. He managed something that might have been a smile. "Now get down there and show those Xenos bastards why humans rule this galaxy." I grabbed Vess and Coleman, and we descended into the ground level's hell. The blast doors were buckling inward now, huge dents appearing with each concentrated impact. Through the gaps, I could see claws and teeth and the endless mass of bodies pressing forward. The door integrity hit 70%, then 65. I took position at the choke point, my laser gun trained on the doors. Around me, 18 guardsmen formed a firing line. We were all that stood between the swarm and complete overrun. "First rank, fire on my command," I said, surprised by how steady my voice was. "Second rank, prepare to fire on reload. We make every shot count. For the Emperor, for Cadia, for every human soul who's counting on us to buy them one more hour." The door integrity hit 50%, and I could see sunlight through the gaps. "Steady!" I called out as the metal began to tear. The doors screamed as they failed. "First rank, fire!" The blast doors came apart in a shriek of tortured metal, and the swarm poured through like a living flood. The first rank's volley caught them in the choke point, 20 laser guns firing as one, creating a wall of superheated death that vaporized the leading Hormagaunts and left their bodies blocking the entrance for exactly 3 seconds. Then the swarm simply climbed over their dead, using the corpses as stepping stones, and kept coming. "Second rank, fire!" My voice was hoarse from screaming over the chittering, the weapons fire, the death rattle of men and monsters. "First rank, reload!" The second volley bought us another heartbeat. Charge packs were slapped into laser guns with practiced speed. We drilled this 1,000 times on Cadia, then 1,000 more in the refugee camps after our world died. The motions were automatic, muscle memory that bypassed thought entirely. A Hormagaunt broke through the kill zone, its talons scrabbling for purchase on the blood-slick floor. Trooper Max put his bayonet through its throat, twisted, and fired his laser gun into the wound. The creature's head exploded in a spray of ichor and bone fragments. "Good kill," I shouted, because in the madness of close combat, Positive reinforcement kept soldiers fighting when every instinct screamed to run. Max, watch your left! He pivoted, blocked a talon strike with his lasgun stock, and drove his boot into the creature's thorax. It staggered, and Vess put 3 last rounds through its skull from her position on the firing line. We killed them. Emperor, help us. We killed so many. The bodies piled up 3 deep in the entrance, forming a barricade of their own dead. Purple ichor ran in rivers across the depot floor, making every step treacherous. The air was thick with the stench of burned chitin and cooked meat, both human and Xenos. But for everyone we killed, 3 more fought to take its place. Corporal, Coleman's voice cracked. My charge pack's empty. Fall back to 3rd rank. Jensen, swap in. I pulled a wounded trooper, arm ending in a bloody stump, face pale from blood loss, into the firing line. He could still shoot one-handed. That made him an asset. Jensen took his position, braced his lasgun against a support pillar, and started firing. Each shot was placed with desperate precision. He knew he was dying, knew the arm wound would turn septic without real medical attention. But he'd die shooting, because that's what Guardsmen did. The Vox bead in my ear crackled with Sergeant Harrow's voice. Ground level, status report. Holding! I screamed back, punctuating the word with a last bolt that took a termagant's head clean off. Ammunition critical. We need resupply or relief. Negative on both. Even Harrow's iron discipline was fraying. Upper levels are engaged. They're coming through the windows, the ventilation shafts, every opening. Of course they were. Tyranids didn't think like humans. They found every weakness, every gap in our defense, and exploited it with perfect coordination. The hive mind was learning our tactics in real time, adapting, evolving its strategy to counter every move we made. A massive form appeared in the shattered doorway. Another Tyranid warrior, its 4 arms carrying bioweapons that looked disturbingly similar to Imperial arms. It fired, and living ammunition splattered against our barricade. Flesh-borer beetles that burrowed into the corpse wall and began eating, creating tunnels through our makeshift defense. Warrior, priority target. I maglocked my lasgun to my webbing and grabbed a frag grenade. Covering fire. The firing line concentrated on the warrior, las bolts hammering against its thick carapace armor. Most shots bounced off or scorched uselessly, but a few found gaps. The joints, the sensory organs, the softer tissue under the arms. I armed the grenade, counted 2 seconds and threw. It arced through the air in what felt like slow motion. I watched it tumble end over end, watched the warrior's head track its trajectory, watched those alien eyes focus on the small sphere of death coming toward it. The warrior caught it. Thrown! I dove behind cover as the creature examined the grenade with what looked like curiosity. Then, with terrifying intelligence, it threw the grenade back. It exploded in midair above our firing line. Shrapnel ripped through Trooper Hen's face, turning his head into red mist. Coleman took fragments in his shoulder and chest, dropping to his knees with a gasp of pain. The blast wave knocked me backward into a supply crate hard enough to crack my flak armor. The warrior stepped through the carnage, its bioweapons trained on our broken line. Then Vess was there, rising from cover like a caddish in fury, her monoknife reversed in her hand. She didn't scream, didn't shout a war cry. She just moved with the fluid grace of a predator, closing the distance between her and the warrior in 3 long strides. The warrior fired. Flesh-borer rounds punched through her flak armor, burrowing into her abdomen. She didn't stop, didn't slow. She leaped, drove her knife upward under the warrior's skull crest and twisted with both hands. The blade punched through into the creature's brain. The warrior convulsed, firing wildly as its nervous system died. One of its rounds hit Vess in the chest, and she fell backward, still gripping the knife, pulling it free as she dropped. I scrambled to her side, pressing my hands against the wounds in her torso. Blood welled between my fingers. Too much blood, pumping in rhythm with her heartbeat. The flesh-borer beetles were still inside her, burrowing deeper, doing damage I couldn't see. Vess, medic! I need a medic! Her hand found mine, squeezed weakly. Forget it, Corporal. I'm Catachin. We know when we're dead. She coughed and blood flecked her lips. Just Make it count. Make them remember. Remember what? Her eyes focused on mine one last time. That humans don't go quiet. Then she was gone. Not immediately. It took another 30 seconds for her breathing to stop, for her grip to loosen, for the light to fade from her eyes. I held her hand the entire time, because nobody should die alone, and Catechins were brave enough to deserve better than a lonely death on an alien world. "Corporal!" Max was screaming. "They're through. They're inside." I looked up. The warriors' death throes had torn a hole in our defensive line. Hormagaunts were streaming through, spreading out into the depot's interior. We'd lost the entrance, lost the barricade, lost any chance of holding them at a choke point. I grabbed Vess's last pistol from her belt, checked the charge, half full, and rose to face the swarm. "Fall back to the inner depot," I roared, firing both laser gun and last pistol into the massive Xenos. "Fighting withdrawal. Nobody runs. We move as a unit." The surviving guardsmen pulled back in good order, firing as they retreated. 12 of us now. 12 out of 38. We left our dead where they'd fallen because there was no time for dignity, no time for last rites, no time for anything except killing and dying. We reached the inner depot, a smaller chamber with reinforced walls and a single entrance we could defend. Sergeant Harrow was already there with the remnants of the upper-level defenders. I counted faces. 21 total. We'd lost more than half our strength. Harrow's uniform was shredded, his augmetic eye sparking where something's claw had torn through the casing. But his organic eye was still sharp, still calculating. "Seal the door," he ordered. "Everyone who can hold a weapon, form up. Last stand doctrine. We hold here until we can't hold anymore." "And then?" someone asked. Harrow pulled his last pistol, checked the charge, and smiled. A death's head grin that would have frightened the swarm if they understood human expressions. "Then we teach these Xenos monsters what Cadians are made of." Outside our sealed door, the chittering grew louder. The inner depot had been designed as a secure storage facility for high-value Imperial assets. Munitions, rare metals, equipment too sensitive to leave exposed. The walls were triple reinforced rockcrete, the door was vault-grade steel, and there were exactly 0 escape routes. We traded defensibility for a tomb. 21 guardsmen stood in a rough semicircle around the door. Laser guns trained on the one point where death would enter. No one spoke. What was left to say? We'd all heard Firebase Throne's promise of reinforcement in 4 hours. We'd all done the math. We'd been fighting for barely 40 minutes. Sergeant Harrow moved among us, checking weapons, redistributing ammunition from the dead to the living. When he reached my position, he paused. His one good eye studied my face, reading things I didn't want to admit. "You're thinking about Vess," he said quietly. "She killed a warrior with a knife." "A knife, Sergeant? That should have been impossible." "Nothing's impossible when you're already dead." She knew she was finished the moment those flesh bores hit her. After that, it was just choosing how to spend her last seconds. He pressed 2 charge packs into my hands. She spent them well, made the Xenos pay. That's all any of us can ask for. The door shuddered as something massive impacted it from the outside. The structural integrity display, still functioning, Emperor be praised, dropped from 100 to 96%. Another hit, 93%. "They're bringing up something big," Coleman said. He'd torn strips from his uniform to bandage the shrapnel wounds in his shoulder, and his face was gray with blood loss. But his laser gun was steady. "Battering ram tactics, efficient." "Tyranids don't do inefficient," I replied, chambering a fresh charge pack. "Every organism is purpose-bred. If they're using something as a ram, it's because they've calculated it's the fastest way through." Another impact, 89%. The door was buckling inward, metal screaming under stress it was never designed to withstand. Max appeared at my elbow, his young face streaked with soot and blood. Some his, most belonging to others. "Corporal Deal, I wanted to thank you for keeping me alive this long, for teaching me how to fight." "Save your thanks until we're extracted," I said, though we both knew extraction wasn't coming. "No, sir, I need to say it now." His voice cracked, and I realized he was barely holding himself together. I lied about my age to join the Guard. I'm 16. Thought I'd be a hero, you know? Thought I'd see the galaxy, fight the Emperor's enemies, come home with stories. He laughed bitterly. Didn't think I'd die on my first deployment. 16, throne, he was just a child. I'd been teaching a child how to kill, how to die, how to stand when every instinct screamed to run. Listen to me, Max. I grabbed his shoulder, forced him to meet my eyes. You've already been a hero. You held the line when it mattered. You killed Xenos that would have killed your brothers. You stood when running was easier. The Emperor sees that. Your regiment sees that. I see that. You're not a scared kid anymore. You're a guardsman of Cadia. Tears cut tracks through the grime on his face, but he nodded. For Cadia. For Cadia, I echoed, and the words felt like a prayer. The door integrity hit 70%, and I could see cracks forming in the steel. Through the gaps, I caught glimpses of what was outside. A Carnifex, just as I'd feared. A living battering ram 4 meters tall and covered in armor plates that could shrug off lasfire like rain. It backed up for another charge. Brace! Harrow bellowed. The Carnifex hit the door like a meteor strike. The entire inner depot shook. Support beams groaned. The integrity display dropped to 58%. One more hit, maybe two, and the door would fail completely. In the sudden silence after the impact, I heard something else. A sound above the chittering, above the Carnifex bellows, above our ragged breathing. A sound that made my blood run cold. Scratching, in the walls, in the ceiling, in the floor beneath our feet. They're tunneling, I whispered. Emperor's mercy. They're coming through the walls. Harrow heard me. His face went pale as he understood. Defensive circle. Weapons out in all directions. We reformed into a tight circle, backs to each other, laser guns pointing at every surface. The scratching grew louder. Dust sifted from the ceiling. The floor trembled. Then the ceiling exploded inward, and hormagaunts dropped into our midst like a rain of claws and teeth. The defensive formation disintegrated into pure chaos. We fired in every direction, last bolts crisscrossing the chamber in a deadly light show. A hormagaunt landed on Trooper Kess, its talons punching through his chest before I could even scream a warning. Max bayoneted another through the throat, only to have 2 more tackle him to the ground. I shot everything that moved that wasn't human. My laser gun grew hot enough to burn my hands through my gloves. The charge pack indicator dropped toward empty. Around me, guardsmen died in 1s and 2s, pulled down by sheer numbers. Coleman went down fighting 3 hormagaunts at once, his monoknife flashing as he carved alien flesh until a talon opened his throat. He died trying to speak, blood bubbling from his lips, the Talon desert forever unreachable. The walls burst inward. More hormagaunts, termagaunts with their flesh-borer weapons. A smaller warrior pushing through the breach, its 4 arms carrying death. Harrow! I screamed. We need to... The Carnifex's final impact tore the vault door completely off its hinges. The massive slab of steel crashed inward, crushing 2 guardsmen beneath its weight. The Carnifex filled the doorway, its 4 scything talons reaching for us, its armored head lowering like a bull about to charge. Sergeant Harrow looked at the Carnifex, looked at the 9 remaining guardsmen, looked at me. In his one good eye, I saw the calculation, the cold mathematics of warfare. We couldn't win, couldn't hold, couldn't even delay them meaningfully anymore, but we could hurt them. He pulled a cluster of frag grenades from his webbing, mag-locked them together, and armed them all at once. Deal! Get anyone who can move to the back storage room, now! Sergeant, what are you? That's an order, Corporal. I understood then, saw what he was planning. Sergeant, no. The Emperor protects, Corporal Deal. He smiled, and for the first time since I'd known him, it reached his eyes. Now run. I grabbed Max by his webbing, hauled him to his feet. Everyone who can move with me. Back room, now. 6 of us. 6 out of 38. We stumbled toward the back storage room as Sergeant Harrow walked toward the Carnifex with a cluster of armed grenades in his hands and the kind of peace on his face that only comes when a man has made his final decision. For Cadia! He roared and charged. We dove through the doorway into the storage room. I slammed the emergency seal, and the blast-proof door locked with a pneumatic hiss. Through the small viewport, I saw Harrow reach the Carnifex, saw him leap at the massive creature, saw him drive the grenades into the soft tissue where its armored head met its body. Then the viewport went white with the explosion. The shock wave hit the door hard enough to throw us backward. My ears rang. My vision swam. When I could see again, I looked through the viewport at what remained of the inner depot. It was carnage. The Carnifex was down, half its head blown away, purple ichor fountaining from the wound. Dead hormagaunts lay scattered like broken toys. The walls were scorched black from the blast. And in the center of it all, where Sergeant Harrow had made his final stand, there was nothing left but a scorch mark on the floor. He'd bought us time. Maybe minutes, maybe only seconds. But he'd bought it with everything he had. Max was crying openly now, his young face twisted with grief and shock. The other 4 survivors, I didn't even know all their names, stared at nothing, their eyes vacant with trauma. I checked my laser gun, last charge pack, maybe 30 shots remaining. Outside the sealed door, the chittering resumed. The swarm had paused, regrouped. Now they were coming again. I looked at the 5 faces around me, boys and girls who'd trusted the Imperium to use their lives wisely, and I knew we'd failed them, but we hadn't broken. The storage room was maybe 4 meters square, packed with supply crates stamped with the Administratum's eagle and warnings in High Gothic about proper handling procedures. Ironic, really. We'd followed every regulation, every protocol, every order, and here we were, 6 guardsmen in a box, waiting for the swarm to finish what it had started. I forced myself to take inventory, not of supplies, that didn't matter anymore, but of people. Max, 16 years old and crying silent tears while checking his laser gun with shaking hands. Trooper Yellen, a stocky woman from the Valhalla Ice Warriors who'd lost her helmet somewhere and bled from a scalp wound that made half her face a crimson mask. Trooper Wes, no relation to Vess, the universe just had a cruel sense of humor. From the Mordian Iron Guard, his parade ground uniform shredded but his posture still parade perfect. And 2 others I'd never properly met. A gaunt man with Tanith Scout markings and a heavyset woman whose regiment patch was too blood-soaked to read. 5 broken soldiers and 1 corporal who was supposed to lead them. Lead them where? Lead them to what? There was nowhere to go, nothing to do except die slower or faster. The door shuddered. They were testing it, probing for weaknesses. This door was stronger than the last, but that wouldn't matter. They'd bring the Carnifex back, or tunnel through the walls again, or simply wait us out until we ran out of air, or water, or hope. Corporal Deal, Yellen said, her Valhalla accent thick with pain. How long do we have? I could have lied. Probably should have. Minutes, maybe an hour if we're lucky. Then I'm going out fighting. She checked her charge pack, nearly empty, and pulled her monoknife. Better than waiting for them to dig us out like vermin. We're not vermin, Wes said sharply, his Mordian discipline showing even now. We're Imperial Guard. We maintain formation and dignity until the end. Dignity, the Tanith Scout laughed bitterly, his voice hoarse. There's no dignity in dying in a box. The Force of Tanith taught me that much before they burned. If I'm dying, I'm taking enemies with me. They were fracturing. The discipline that had held us together was cracking under the weight of inevitable death. I needed to give them something, purpose, hope, anything. Listen to me, I said, and something in my voice made them all turn. Sergeant Harrow bought us time. Every second we survive is a second he paid for with his life. We owe him more than falling apart. We owe him revenge, the unnamed woman said. She had a Cadian accent, another survivor of our broken world. We owe him a body count that matters. Then let's give it to him. I looked at each face in turn, but we do it smart. We don't just open the door and charge. We make them come to us. We make them bleed for every centimeter. And when our ammunition runs out, we fix bayonets and teach them why humanity rules this galaxy. Max wiped his eyes, and when he looked at me, I saw something change in his expression. The fear was still there, but under it was something harder. Acceptance, maybe, or just exhaustion so deep that death seemed like rest. What's the plan, Corporal? Plan. He wanted a plan. as if there was anything except dying well or dying poorly. But I looked around the storage room and an idea formed. Desperate, probably futile, but better than waiting. These supply crates, what's in them? Wes moved to the nearest crate, checked the manifest label. Promethium fuel cells, 6 cases, marked for Hellhound flamers. Promethium, the Imperium's favorite solution to everything from heretics to Xenos to bad morale. Highly flammable, sticky, burned hot enough to melt ceramite, and we had 6 cases of it. Open them, I ordered, carefully. Yellen Tanith, I need you on that wall panel. Pull the environmental controls. If we're going to burn, we're taking them with us. Understanding dawned on their faces. It wasn't a rescue plan. It was a funeral pyre plan. We turned this storage room into an inferno, and when the swarm broke through, they'd burn with us. They moved with purpose now, the fracturing replaced by grim determination. Wes and the unnamed Cadian woman cracked open the Promethium crates. The fuel cells were standard Imperial issue, each one containing enough Promethium to burn for 30 minutes in a Hellhound's flamer tanks. We had dozens of them. The Tanith scout, I really should have learned his name, jimmied open the environmental control panel. I can override the fire suppression system. When this goes up, it'll stay up. Do it, I said. Max, help me position these cells. We want maximum coverage when they breach. We worked in the confined space, arranging fuel cells around the door, stacking them against the walls, creating a spiderweb of volatile materials that would turn the entire room into a crematorium. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I'd expected to shake, to hesitate, to show some sign of the fear that clawed at my chest. But maybe this was what peace felt like. Knowing you'd done everything possible, spent every round, used every second. Sergeant Harrow had died buying us time. Vess had died killing a warrior. Coleman had died defending his brothers. Now it was our turn to add to the bill. The door shuttered again, harder this time. Through the viewport, I could see them massing, dozens of Hormagaunts, several warriors, and behind them, the Carnifex Harrow had wounded. It was still functional despite the grenades, still driven by the hive mind's imperative to consume. Almost done, Yellen reported from the environmental panel. One more wire and the suppression system is offline. This whole place will burn when we trigger it. Good. I pulled my last charge pack from my webbing, slotted it into my laser gun. 30 shots, 30 more dead Xenos before the end. Everyone, form up on me. When that door comes down, we give them 1 volley, maximum casualties, then we trigger the Promethium and we burn. They formed up, 6 guardsmen standing shoulder to shoulder in a space barely big enough for them. Max on my right, his laser gun held in the proper Cadian grip I'd taught him. Yalen on my left, bleeding but unbowed. The others filling the gaps, their weapons ready, their faces set. I never thought I'd die on an agri world, Wes said conversationally, as if we were discussing garrison duty instead of immolation. Always figured it'd be some glorious battlefield. Armageddon, maybe, or Cadia before it fell. Every battlefield is glorious if you die well, I replied, and we're going to die very well. The door's integrity finally failed. It didn't explode inward like the last one. The swarm had learned. Instead, they peeled it away section by section, controlled and methodical, revealing themselves in the gap like a nightmare taking shape. Warriors in front, using their bulk as shields. Hormagaunts behind them, ready to pour through. And in the back, something I hadn't seen before. A hive tyrant, massive and terrible, its psychic presence pressing against my mind like a physical weight. A synapse creature powerful enough to coordinate the entire swarm. The tyrant's eyes found me through the gap, found me and knew me, recognized me as the one who'd organized resistance, who'd killed its warriors, who'd cost the swarm more biomass than expected. In my head, I felt its thoughts, if they could be called thoughts. Hunger, recognition, the cold calculus of a predator that had identified worthy prey. Ready, I said quietly. The door came down. Fire! 6 laser guns spoke as one. Warriors jerked backward, their armor scored by last fire. Hormagaunts dropped, their momentum carrying them forward even in death. We poured everything into that volley. Every round, every ounce of hatred for the Xenos that had killed our brothers, every moment of fear and rage and desperate defiance. My lasgun's charge pack clicked empty. Now! I screamed. The Tanith scout shot the primary promethium cell. The world became fire. They say promethium burns at 3,000 degrees. They say it can melt through tank armor, reduce a man to ash in seconds, turn a battlefield into a crematorium. They don't tell you what it feels like when you're inside the inferno, when you've chosen to burn rather than be eaten. The first promethium cell exploded in a blossom of white-hot flame that engulfed the doorway. The warriors caught in the breach shrieked, an almost human sound of agony, as their heightened armor blackened and cracked. The hormagaunts behind them ignited like torches, their bodies consumed so quickly they barely had time to thrash. Then the second cell went, and the third. And suddenly the entire storage room was a furnace, the air itself combusting. The heat so intense it felt like my lungs were cooking from the inside. I'd expected to die instantly, expected the flames to take me before I could even register pain. But the fire had started at the door, spreading inward, and we had seconds, maybe 10, maybe 20, before it reached our position at the back of the room. Seconds to watch the swarm burn. The warriors tried to retreat, but the press of bodies behind them was too dense. They died where they stood, their flesh melting, their bioweapons cooking off in secondary explosions. Hormagaunts ran in circles, blind with agony, setting more of their kin ablaze. The Carnifex outside the door reared back, its forward armor plates glowing cherry red from the heat. And through it all, I felt the Hive Tyrant's psychic presence, not retreating, not fleeing, but furious. For the first time since the swarm arrived, I felt something that might have been emotion from the Hive mind. Not pain, not fear, but rage at the sheer waste. All that biomass, all those organisms, burning beyond recovery. We weren't just killing them. We were denying them to the swarm forever. "Corporal!" Max was screaming, but I could barely hear him over the roar of the flames. The heat was incredible now, blistering exposed skin, making the air shimmer and dance. "Corporal, look!" He was pointing at the back wall, the one we'd backed against to give ourselves maximum distance from the door. In the heat distortion, I could see something I'd missed before. A maintenance hatch, small, maybe half a meter across, marked with warnings about authorized personnel only. A way out. No, not out. There was no out anymore. But maybe a way to keep running, keep fighting, keep denying the swarm their victory for a few more minutes. "Wes!" I grabbed the Mordian's arm. "Help me with this hatch." We threw ourselves at it, hands scrabbling at the locking mechanism. Behind us, the promethium fire was advancing, consuming the crates we'd stacked, reaching for us with hungry fingers of flame. The heat was unbearable. My uniform was starting to smoke. The hatch wouldn't budge. Decades of neglect had rusted the mechanism solid. "Move!" Yellen shoved us aside, raised her lasgun, nearly empty now, and fired her last 3 shots into the hatch's locking mechanism. The metal glowed, then sagged. She kicked it with her boot, once, twice, and on the third impact it gave way with a screech of tortured metal. "Go!" I shoved Max toward the opening. "Everyone through, now!" He didn't argue, just dove through the hatch like it was salvation itself. The unnamed Cadian woman followed, then the Tanith scout, then Wes. Yellen looked at me, her face blistered from the heat, her Valhalla pale skin red as a burn victim's. "You first, Corporal. You're the ranking survivor." "I'm the ranking survivor, so I go last. That's the job. Move." She gave me a look that said she understood I was probably condemning myself, then dove through the hatch. I took one last look at the storage room, now completely engulfed in flames, the promethium burning so hot the rockcrete walls were beginning to crack. Through the inferno, I saw shapes moving, the swarm retreating from the fire at last. And in the psychic backwash, I felt the hive mind's attention settle on me fully. It knew I was still alive, knew I'd escaped its trap. The hunt wasn't over. I threw myself through the hatch as the last promethium cell exploded behind me. The shock wave launched me forward into darkness, and I fell, tumbled through space that seemed to go on forever. bounced off metal surfaces, crashed into something soft that grunted in pain. "Corporal?" Max's voice in the darkness. "Is that you?" "Yeah." I coughed, tasted blood. Had I bitten my tongue in the fall? "Status? Everyone here?" A chorus of affirmatives. 6 voices. All 6 of us had made it through. Emperor be praised. But made it through to where? Someone's laser gun activated its light attachment, and I saw we were in a maintenance tunnel. Narrow, barely tall enough to crouch in, stretching in both directions into darkness. The walls were lined with pipes and conduits, and I could hear water dripping somewhere in the distance. "Service tunnels," Wes said, his Mordian training showing. "Every Imperial facility has them. Usually connect multiple buildings, give maintenance crews access to infrastructure." "Can they get us out of the depot?" the Tanith scout asked. "Maybe, or they might just be a tomb with more room to run." I checked my laser gun. Empty. Completely empty. I looked at the others. "Ammunition check. Anyone have anything?" Max had 5 shots. Yellen had 3. The rest were empty. 8 shots among 6 guardsmen. Enough to kill 8 more Xenos before we were down to knives and fists. "Then we make those 8 count," I said. "Single file, weapons ready. If we find an exit, we take it. If we find the swarm, we make them regret following us." We moved through the tunnels in silence, our footsteps echoing off the metal walls. Every sound seemed impossibly loud. Our breathing, the creak of our equipment, the drip of water. I kept expecting to hear chittering behind us, to feel claws on my back, to see eyes gleaming in the darkness ahead. But the tunnels were empty, silent, wrong. "This doesn't make sense," I whispered. "They should be hunting us. The hive mind knows we're alive." "Maybe the fire did more damage than we thought," Max offered hopefully. "Maybe we actually hurt them." Then I felt it again, that pressure in my mind, that alien presence. Not angry anymore. Not hunting, waiting. "Stop!" I hissed. Everyone froze. "Don't move! Don't make a sound!" In the silence I heard it. Above us, below us, in the walls themselves. That familiar scratching, that chittering, that sound of claws on metal. They weren't hunting us. They'd known where we were the entire time. They'd let us run into the tunnels, had herded us here, because the tunnels were a kill box, and we'd walked right into it. The ceiling exploded downward. The first Hormigaunt dropped directly onto the unnamed Cadian woman. I heard her scream, sharp and abruptly cut off, before the chittering swarm swallowed the sound entirely. She died without firing a shot, without even reaching for her knife, torn apart in the darkness before the rest of us could react. 5 now. 5 out of 38. "Run!" I didn't know where, didn't care. Any direction was better than staying still in a killing ground. We scattered like rats in a flood, each of us choosing a direction by pure instinct. I grabbed Max by his webbing and hauled him left, toward what looked like a larger junction. Behind us, laser guns cracked, Yellen's 3 shots lighting up the tunnel in strobing flashes. Each flash showed more Hormagaunts dropping from above, crawling from vents, emerging from side passages we'd never noticed. Max fired twice into the mass behind us. 3 shots left among us. 3 shots against a swarm that numbered in the thousands. The tunnel branched ahead. I chose right because left looked narrower, and narrow meant less room to dodge. We ran through a junction filled with ancient machinery, water purifiers maybe, or air recyclers. In the dim emergency lighting, I caught glimpses of Imperial eagles corroded by time, warning signs in high Gothic about proper maintenance protocols that hadn't been followed in decades. "Corporal!" Max's voice behind me. "I can't—" He went down. Not from a Hormigaunt attack, just exhaustion. The boy had been running on adrenaline and fear for hours, and his 16-year-old body had finally given out. He crashed to his knees, gasping, his laser gun clattering to the floor. I could hear them coming. The chittering growing louder, the scrape of claws on metal, the wet sound of alien breath. We had seconds, maybe less. "Get up!" I hauled him to his feet. "Max, I can't carry you and fight. You have to move." I'm sorry, Corporal. I just—" His legs buckled again. The boy had nothing left to give. The first Hormigaunt rounded the corner. Then 3 more. Then a dozen, their bodies filling the tunnel behind us, their eyes gleaming with bioluminescence. Their mouths full of teeth designed to shear through armor and bone with equal efficiency. I pushed Max behind me, raised my empty laser gun like a club, and prepared to die the way Vess had died, the way Harrow had died, the way every guardsman died when they'd given everything and had nothing left except defiance. Then the wall exploded outward. Not from Xenos tunneling, from last fire, heavy last fire, the distinctive crack boom of las cannons punching through rockcrete. Light flooded the tunnel, blinding after so long in the dark. I heard voices screaming in high Gothic. Contact! Xenos in the service tunnels. Suppressing fire! Light them up! There's guardsmen down there. Check your targets. A figure appeared in the breach, power-armored, massive, carrying a bolter that looked tiny in his hands but was actually the size of my torso. Space Marine. Ultramarines chapter from the blue ceramite and the golden ultima on his pauldron. He raised his bolter and fired over our heads. Mass reactive rounds screamed past us, so close I felt the air displacement, and the Hormigaunts behind us exploded. Not died, exploded. Each bolt punching through chitin armor and detonating inside their bodies, turning them into purple mist and shrapnel. Guardsman! The Space Marine's voice boomed through his helmet's Vox grill. To me! Now! I didn't question, didn't hesitate. I grabbed Max and hauled him toward the breach, toward the light, toward the Emperor's angels of death, who'd somehow impossibly arrived when we'd given up all hope of rescue. More Space Marines poured through the breach, their bolters speaking thunder. Behind them came regular Imperial Guard, hundreds of them, fresh troops in clean uniforms, carrying proper equipment. A sergeant grabbed me and Max, pulled us through the breach into what looked like a forward command post. How many? He demanded. How many survivors? 6, I said, then corrected myself. 5, no, maybe 3. I don't know. We got separated in the tunnels. 3 confirmed, another voice called. A medic was kneeling over someone on a stretcher. I recognized Yellen's bloody face, her eyes closed, chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Alive. She'd made it somehow. 5 total, the sergeant said into his Vox. All others presumed KIA. Colonel, the depot is lost. Recommend we evacuate survivors and pull back to the secondary line. Through the breach, I could still hear the bolters firing. The Space Marines were holding the tunnel junction, killing everything that tried to follow us through. But even their firepower was just buying time. The swarm was endless. Someone pressed a canteen into my hands. I drank without thinking, the water tasting like the finest wine after hours of breathing smoke and burning promethium. Max collapsed next to me, his face gray, his hands shaking so badly he couldn't hold his own canteen. The sergeant, I said suddenly. Sergeant Harrow. Did he? All KIA in the depot are presumed lost, the medic said gently. Nothing survives when the swarm takes a position. I'm sorry. I'd known. Of course I'd known. But hearing it confirmed, hearing that Harrow's sacrifice had been absolute, that there was nothing left of him to recover or honor or remember except our testimony, that hit harder than I'd expected. How? I asked the sergeant. How did you find us? Dumb luck and the Emperor's grace, or he replied. Reinforcements arrived early. Space Marines responding to the initial distress call. They dropped on the depot, expecting to reinforce your position. Found nothing but fire and Xenos. But one of their librarians, that's a psyker, son, felt human minds still alive in the tunnels. They punched through to extract whoever they could find. Early, the reinforcements had arrived early. 3 hours early. If Harrow had known, if he'd held just a little longer, he might have. No. That was a thought that led to madness. He'd made the choice that made sense with the information he had. He died buying us time. That the time turned out to be enough was the Emperor's will, not something Harrow could have known. Where are the others? Max asked, his voice small. Wes? The Tanith Scout? The sergeant's expression told us everything. They didn't make it through the swarm, he said. We found remains. I'm sorry. You 3 are the only survivors of the 114th Cadian deployment. 3. Out of 38. Less than 10% survival rate. In some regiments, that would be considered acceptable losses. In Cadia, we'd been taught that every soldier mattered, that 10% survival meant 90% failure. A space marine approached, not the one who'd first breached the wall, but one whose armor was marked with librarian icons. His eyes were unsettling, glowing faintly with psychic power. When he spoke, his voice resonated in my skull as much as my ears. "Guardsman Corporal," he said, and I realized he was addressing me. "You are Corvus Deal of the 114th Cadian Shock Troops?" "Yes, my lord." "You held the depot against impossible odds. You killed a Tyranid warrior in close combat. You organized a fighting retreat that cost the swarm more biomass than they could afford. You burned hundreds of their organisms beyond recovery." He tilted his head, studying me with those unnatural eyes. "The hive mind remembers you. I can feel its attention, even now. You have become notable." That didn't sound like a compliment. "What does that mean, my lord?" "It means you have caught the attention of an intelligence that spans galaxies. It means the swarm will hunt you specifically if it detects you again. It means you have become, in the TYRANIDS collective consciousness, prey worth pursuing." Great. I'd survived the swarm only to become personally marked by a galaxy-devouring horror, but at least I was alive to regret it. "Can we hold the planet?" I asked. The librarian's expression was grim. "No. Graia's harvest is lost. We're evacuating all Imperial forces. The planet will be subjected to exterminatus within 72 hours. He paused. Your sergeant's final message reached Firebase Throne. He was right. This world cannot be saved. Harrow had been right. He'd died knowing he was right. Somehow, that made it worse. They loaded us onto a Valkyrie within the hour. Me, Max, and Yellen, along with a dozen other survivors scraped from various last stands across Graia's harvest. None of us spoke during the flight to orbit. What was there to say? We'd survived, and that felt more like guilt than victory. Through the Valkyrie's viewport, I watched the planet shrink below us. From orbit, Graia's harvest looked almost peaceful. Green and gold, clouds drifting across blue oceans. The kind of world the Imperium needed to feed its endless war machine. You couldn't see the swarm from up here. Couldn't see the biomass spreading like cancer across the continents, converting everything it touched into more Tyranids. The Navy frigate Endurance of Terra took us aboard with the efficiency of a machine processing cargo. We were debriefed separately, standard procedure after Xenos contact, especially Tyranid contact. They needed to make sure none of us were infected, that we hadn't been compromised by genostealers or had our minds touched too deeply by the hive mind. The interrogator, a nervous man with administratum robes and a data slate, asked the same questions 5 different ways. How many Xenos did you see? What bioforms? Did you experience any psychic contact? Any unusual thoughts or compulsions? I answered truthfully, told him about the warriors, the Carnifex, the Trigon that had tunneled up from below. Told him about the hive tyrant's attention, the way it had known me. The interrogator's stylus scratched against his data slate, recording every detail for archives that would probably never be read. "And the other members of your platoon?" he asked. "Can you account for all casualties?" I listed them. Every name, every death I'd witnessed. Vest dying with a knife in a warrior's skull. Coleman with his throat torn out. Harrow charging a Carnifex with armed grenades. The unnamed Cadian woman pulled down in the tunnels. 33 names total, though I'd only known half of them personally. "They died well," the interrogator said, making a note. "The Emperor recognizes their sacrifice." The words were meant to be comforting, I suppose. Standard issue consolation, delivered with all the warmth of a servitor reading from a script. I nodded because it was expected, but inside I felt nothing except a vast emptiness where my platoon used to be. They cleared me after 6 hours of questioning and medical examination. Physically, I was intact. Minor burns from the Prometheum fire, cuts and bruises from close combat, early signs of malnutrition and dehydration. Nothing a few days of rest and proper rations wouldn't fix. Mentally, well, the administratum didn't have tests for that. Either you were functional enough to fight again, or you weren't. I was functional, so they stamped my records and sent me to the barracks. Max was already there, sitting on a bunk and staring at nothing. He'd been cleaned up, the blood and grime washed away, fresh fatigues issued, but he still looked like a ghost. 16 years old and already hollowed out by war. "Hey," I said, sitting beside him. "You okay?" Stupid question. Of course he wasn't okay. None of us were okay. "I keep seeing them," he said quietly. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the hormagaunts. I hear the chittering. I smell the biomass." He looked at me with eyes too old for his young face. "Does it get better, Corporal? Does it ever stop?" I wanted to lie, to tell him that time healed wounds, that the nightmares faded, that eventually you learn to live with the memories. But I'd been fighting since Cadia fell, and I still saw that planet breaking apart every time I tried to sleep. "No," I said, "it doesn't stop. You just learn to carry it." He nodded slowly, accepting the truth with the same exhausted grace he'd shown when fixing his bayonet for the final stand. "I thought I'd be a hero," he said. "Thought I'd do something important, make a difference." "You did. You held the line when it mattered. You killed Xenos that would have killed others. You stood when running was easier." I gripped his shoulder. "That's what being a guardsman means. Not glory, not recognition, just standing when it counts." "Sergeant Harrow said something like that," Max whispered. "Right before he was right, and he died making sure we'd understand." We sat in silence for a while, two survivors in a room full of empty bunks. The endurance of Terra was overcrowded with evacuees. Refugees from Graia's harvest, guard regiments pulled from losing battles, Navy personnel from stations the Tyranids had overrun. Every face I passed in the corridors wore the same expression. Shell-shocked, haunted, wondering why they'd survived when so many hadn't. Yellen found us eventually. She looked better than she had in the tunnels. Medics had patched the scalp wound, replaced her lost blood with transfusions, pumped her full of antibiotics and stims. But her eyes had the same 1,000-meter stare we all shared. "They're saying the planet dies tomorrow," she said without preamble. "Exterminatus, cyclonic torpedoes. They'll burn the atmosphere and sterilize the surface." "Good," I said, and meant it. Better to kill the planet than let the Tyranids have it. Every scrap of biomass they consumed made them stronger, grew their numbers, fueled their advance. Denial was victory when fighting an enemy that ate worlds. 6 million people were on that planet, Yellen continued. Farmers, workers, families. They're all gone now. Consumed. Turned into more Tyranids. She sat heavily on a bunk. "We held them for 4 hours. What did that even accomplish?" "It accomplished survivors," a new voice said. We turned to see the ultramarine librarian from the tunnels. He had to duck to enter the barracks, his massive frame barely fitting through the doorway. Without his helmet, his face was scarred and aged. Those space marines could live for centuries. "You held long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Long enough to extract 300 Imperial citizens from the capital before it fell. Long enough to give the Navy time to evacuate orbital stations. 300, Yellen repeated bitterly. Out of 6 million. 300 who would have died without your sacrifice," the librarian corrected. 300 lives saved because 38 guardsmen stood their ground. He looked at each of us in turn. "Do not diminish what you accomplished. The Imperium needs soldiers who understand that even small victories matter." "My lord," I said carefully, "you said the hive mind remembers me. What does that mean for my future deployments?" The librarian's expression grew somber. "The Tyranids will hunt you if they detect you again. Their synapse creatures will recognize your psychic signature, weak though it is, and prioritize you as a target. You have become a threat they wish to eliminate. So I'm marked, tagged, like prey. Like prey that fought back and survived. That makes you dangerous in their calculus." He paused. "There are regiments that specialize in fighting Tyranids, units that understand their tactics, their biology, their weaknesses. The Cadian 114th is being reformed with survivors from multiple deployments. I have recommended you for promotion to Sergeant and reassignment to the new formation." Sergeant, the rank Harrow had held, the rank that meant responsibility for soldiers' lives, that meant making the impossible choices, that meant dying last so others might live longer. I accept, I said, because what else could I say? The Imperium didn't ask if you wanted responsibility. It gave you what it needed you to carry. The librarian nodded. Report to Muster Deck 7 at 600 tomorrow. You'll meet your new platoon. He turned to leave, then paused. Sergeant Harrow's final transmission was recorded. His words about recommending exterminatus were correct and likely saved additional Imperial forces from being committed to a lost cause. He will be noted in the regimental records as a hero of the Imperium. Noted in records. A line of text in an archive that might survive 1,000 years or might be lost in the next bureaucratic purge. That's all that remained of a man who'd fought 23 campaigns and died charging a Carnifex with grenades. But it was something, more than most guardsmen got. After the librarian left, the three of us sat in silence, processing everything we'd survived, everything we'd lost, everything we'd become in the space of one day. Sergeant Deal, Max said quietly, testing the title. It suits you. Don't, I said. I'm not Harrow. I'm not. No, Yellen interrupted. You're not. You're Corvus Deal, and you kept us alive when we should have died. That's enough. Was it? I didn't know. But tomorrow I'd report for duty. Tomorrow I'd meet soldiers who'd look to me for orders, for leadership, for the impossible certainty that we'd survive the next deployment. Tomorrow I'd become the thing I'd always respected and feared, the sergeant who made the hard calls. Tonight I was just a guardsman who'd survived by luck and the sacrifice of better soldiers. Outside the viewport, Graia's harvest continued its slow rotation. Tomorrow the Navy would launch its torpedoes, and the planet would burn. The Tyranids would lose their foothold, and the Imperium would lose another world. Victory and defeat all at once. That's what war in the 41st millennium looked like. Not clear wins or losses, just endless grinding attrition where success meant dying slower than your enemy. I closed my eyes and saw Harrow's final charge. Saw Vess driving her knife into a warrior's skull. Saw Coleman defending his brothers until his throat was torn out. Heroes. All of them. Unknown beyond our small unit. Unremembered except by those who'd witnessed their deaths. That was the real horror of the 41st millennium. Not the Xenos or the heretics or the endless war. It was knowing that billions died heroically every day, and the galaxy didn't care. Couldn't care. There were too many deaths to mourn them all. So we mourned our own, remembered our brothers and sisters, carried their memories into the next battle and the next, until finally it was our turn to become a memory for whoever survived us. That was what being a guardsman meant. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in the depot, hearing the chittering, smelling the biomass, feeling the hive mind's attention crawling across my thoughts like insects under my skin. So I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling of the barracks, listening to Max's fitful breathing and the distant hum of the ship's engines. At 0400, I gave up on sleep entirely and headed to the ship's chapel. Every Imperial vessel had one, a small chamber dedicated to the God Emperor, where soldiers could pray before battle or give thanks after survival. I'd never been particularly religious. Kadia had taught us that faith was important, but so was ammunition, and you couldn't win a war on prayer alone. But tonight, this morning, I needed something. Some sense that the deaths I'd witnessed meant something beyond tactical calculations and casualty reports. The chapel was empty except for a single figure kneeling before the golden Aquila. As I entered, he turned, and I recognized the ultramarine librarian. Without his armor, wearing simple robes, he looked almost human. Almost. Sergeant Deal, he said, you cannot sleep. It wasn't a question. No, my lord. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in the swarm. He nodded as if he'd expected this answer. The Tyranids leave scars that do not show on flesh. Their psychic presence burrows into your mind, creating wounds that never truly heal. He gestured to the pew beside him. Sit. Let us speak of what troubles you. I sat, feeling absurdly small next to his bulk. Space Marines were giants among men, and this one radiated a psychic presence that made the air feel heavy. The hive mind, I said. When it looked at me, when it knew me, I felt something. Recognition, maybe, like it was categorizing me, filing me away in whatever passes for its memory. That is precisely what it did, the librarian confirmed. The hive mind learns from every engagement. It studies effective prey, identifies threats, adapts its tactics. You demonstrated leadership, tactical acumen, and the ability to inflict disproportionate casualties. That makes you notable. Notable prey, yes, but also a teacher. He turned to face me fully. The tyrannids learn from those who resist them most effectively. Your tactics, your decisions, your methods of killing their organisms, all of that information has been absorbed into the hive mind's collective intelligence. The next time it faces a similar situation, it will be prepared. The weight of that settled on my shoulders like a physical thing. So by fighting well, I've made them stronger. No, by fighting well, you've forced them to evolve. That is not the same as making them stronger. Evolution takes time, resources, adaptation. Every adaptation the hive mind makes to counter one threat leaves it potentially vulnerable to others. He smiled grimly. You have become part of an arms race that has lasted millions of years. Humanity adapts. The tyrannids counter-adapt. We counter their counter-adaptations. And so it continues across the galaxy in a war that may never end. That's supposed to be comforting? It is supposed to be truth. Comfort is for civilians. Soldiers need truth. I thought about that, about the endless cycle of adaptation and counter-adaptation, about being a single data point in a war too vast to comprehend. My lord, why did you recommend me for promotion? I lost 92% of my platoon. Because you lost only 92% when you should have lost 100%, he replied. Because you made decisions that cost the swarm more than they could afford. Because when faced with certain death, you chose to burn the enemy rather than simply die. He paused. And because I have seen your future, Sergeant Deal. The words hung in the air like a curse. What? I am a librarian, a psyker. The warp shows me possibilities, not certainties, but potential futures, branching from every choice. His eyes glowed faintly. I see you standing before the swarm again, standing many times. Each time you survive when others fall. Each time you teach the Imperium something new about fighting the Great Devourer. And how do these visions end? He looked away and I knew the answer before he spoke. All futures end in death, Sergeant. The only question is what you accomplish before that ending. Comforting. Absolutely comforting. We sat in silence for a while, the chapel's Aquila gleaming in the dim light. Finally, I asked the question that had been eating at me since the depot fell. Did it matter? Any of it? Harrow's sacrifice? Vess's last stand? All those deaths? Did they change anything? The librarian considered this carefully. 300 souls evacuated from the capital. Intelligence gathered about a previously unknown Tyranid vanguard fleet. Tactical data about their adaptation to urban warfare. And 3 survivors who can teach other regiments what they learned. He met my eyes. Did it save Graia's harvest? No. Did it matter? Ask the 300 evacuees. Ask the regiments who will benefit from your tactical reports. Ask yourself if you would have chosen differently. Would I? Given the chance to go back, knowing what I knew now, would I have done anything different? Ordered a retreat earlier? Abandoned the depot without a fight? Surrendered to save lives? No, because Guardsman didn't surrender, didn't retreat unless ordered, didn't question the missions given by the Emperor's commanders. We stood and fought and died, because that's what the Imperium needed us to do. I wouldn't have changed anything, I admitted. Then it mattered. That is the only metric that counts. At 05:30, I left the chapel and returned to the barracks. Max and Yellen were awake now, pulling on their uniforms, preparing for the day. Max looked marginally better, still haunted but functional. Yellen moved with the mechanical efficiency of a soldier who'd learned to compartmentalize trauma. Ready, Sergeant? She asked, and I realized she'd already accepted my promotion. Already shifted her mental framework to accommodate the new hierarchy. As ready as I'll ever be. We made our way to Muster Deck 7, The corridors were crowded with refugees and military personnel, everyone moving with the organized chaos of a vessel preparing for departure. Through viewports, I caught glimpses of other ships in the evacuation fleet, dozens of transports, frigates, destroyers, all gathering for the final withdrawal from Graia's harvest. Muster Deck 7 was packed with guardsmen from a dozen different regiments. I saw Cadian purple, Catachan green, Valhallan white and red, Mordian blue. Survivors all, scraped together from failed defenses and last stands across the planet. They stood in rough formation, waiting for someone to give them purpose. A colonel I didn't recognize stood on a raised platform. His uniform was Cadian, but the medals on his chest spoke of campaigns across multiple sectors. Behind him, a banner displayed the reformed 114th Cadian's new colors, purple and gold, with the broken planet of Cadia at its center. "Attention!" the colonel barked, and 300 guardsmen snapped to attention as one. "I am Colonel Varen, commanding officer of the reformed 114th Cadian shock troops. You have been selected from survivor pools across multiple engagements. You are here because you demonstrated tactical competence, physical endurance, and the mental fortitude to continue fighting after witnessing horrors that would break lesser soldiers." He paused, letting that sink in. "We are reforming this regiment with one purpose, to become the Imperium's specialists in combating Tyranid incursions. You will learn their biology, their tactics, their weaknesses. You will teach other regiments what you know. You will stand between the Great Devourer and the Imperium's citizens, and you will do so knowing that every engagement might be your last." Another pause. Some of the guardsmen shifted uncomfortably. Others stood straighter, accepting the burden. "This is not a punishment. This is recognition that you have survived what others could not, that you have learned what others died before learning, that you are valuable precisely because you understand the enemy." He looked across the assembled soldiers. "Who among you will accept this duty?" 300 voices answered as one. "For the Emperor! For Cadia! Outstanding! Platoon leaders, step forward and claim your squads." I stepped forward with 19 other sergeants, each of us newly promoted, each of us carrying the weight of too many deaths. Colonel Varen handed me a data slate with my platoon roster. 30 names, most from regiments I'd never heard of, all survivors of engagements with the TYRANIDS. Among them, I saw two familiar names, Max and Yellen. They'd been assigned to my command. Whether that was the Emperor's mercy or his cruelty, I couldn't say. I found them in the crowd and gestured them forward. They reported with crisp salutes, their faces set in professional mass. "Trooper Max, Trooper Yellen. Welcome to 1st Platoon, a company, 114th Cadian." I looked at the rest of my new command. "All of you, welcome. We've all survived the impossible. Now we're going to teach the Imperium how to do it consistently." Behind us, through the deck's massive viewport, Graia's harvest turned slowly in the void. Soon, the Navy would launch its cyclonic torpedoes. Soon, the planet would burn. Soon, one more world would be lost to the Imperium's endless wars. But we'd survived, and survival meant the chance to fight again, to learn from our mistakes, to honor our dead by teaching others how to avoid their fates. That's what being a guardsman meant. Not winning. We'd probably never win. Not really. Just surviving long enough to pass on what we'd learned, to be the memory that kept our brothers alive in tactics and doctrines, in hard-won knowledge. I looked at my platoon, 30 soldiers who'd stared into the Great Devourer's maw and lived to remember it. They were scarred, traumatized, and probably half mad from what they'd survived. They were perfect. The cyclonic torpedoes launched at 800 hours. We watched from the observation deck. The entire reformed 114th assembled to witness what our sacrifices had purchased. 6 warheads, each one carrying enough destructive force to crack continents, descended through Graia's harvest atmosphere in trails of fire. They detonated simultaneously across the planet's major population centers. The first thing you noticed was the light, brilliant white flashes that turned the planet's surface into a miniature sun. Then came the shock waves, visible even from orbit as circular patterns expanding across the continents. Atmosphere ignited. Oceans boiled. The biomass that had been spreading across the planet like cancer simply ceased, burned away in temperatures that exceeded the core of a star. Within 3 minutes, Graia's harvest surface was a uniform gray, dead, sterilized, utterly lifeless. 6 million Imperial citizens, billions of tons of agricultural products the Imperium needed, centuries of infrastructure and development, all of it gone, reduced to ash and radioactive dust, because the alternative was feeding it to the swarm. Exterminatus complete, Colonel Varen announced over the Vox. The Tyranid presence on Graia's harvest has been eliminated. The planet is lost, but the enemy gains nothing. Remember this, soldiers. Remember what we fight for. Not to save every world, we cannot, but to deny the enemy their victory, to make them pay for every meter of ground, to ensure that even when we lose, they do not win. Around me, guardsmen stood in silence. Some wept. Others stared with empty eyes. A few muttered prayers to the Emperor. We all understood what we'd witnessed, the Imperium's final solution when all else failed. Burn it, sterilize it, deny it to the enemy even if it meant destroying everything we'd built. That was humanity's strategy against the Tyranids. Not victory, just making sure they starved. Max stood beside me, his young face carved from stone. All those people, he whispered, we couldn't save them. No, I agreed. But we delayed the swarm long enough to evacuate 300, and we'll use what we learned to save more next time. Will there be a next time? I looked at him, this boy who'd aged a lifetime in a single day, and told him the truth. Yes, there will always be a next time. The Tyranids don't stop, don't negotiate, don't do anything except consume. So we'll fight them again and again until either they're all dead or we are. That's a grim future. Sergeant, that's the only future the 41st millennium offers. The observation deck began to empty as guardsmen filed out to their new assignments. My platoon, first platoon, a company, assembled around me with the discipline of soldiers who'd learned that orders meant survival. 30 faces, representing at least 15 different regiments. Cadians like me and Max. Catachans with their jungle fighter builds. Valhallans still looking uncomfortable in the ship's climate-controlled warmth. Mordians standing at perfect attention. Tallarn desert fighters. Vostroyans with their elaborate facial hair. Kriegers whose names we'd never learned because they only answered to numbers. A cross-section of the Imperial Guard, united by one commonality. They'd all faced the Tyranids and survived. First platoon, I said, and 30 pairs of eyes focused on me with varying degrees of skepticism. I was young for a sergeant, 23, though combat had aged me, and I hadn't earned their respect yet. That would take time and blood. I'm Sergeant Corvus Deal, formerly of the 114th Cadian. I lost 33 soldiers on Graia's harvest. I intend to lose fewer of you on our next deployment. That got their attention. Honesty wasn't always the best policy, but with survivors of Tyranid engagements, anything less was insulting. We're all here because we did something right. We survived when statistics said we shouldn't. We killed Xenos when we should have been killed. We learned lessons others died before learning. I paused, making eye contact with each soldier. Now we're going to turn those lessons into doctrine, into tactics, into the knowledge that saves the next regiment that faces the swarm. A Catachan woman raised her hand. Not regulation, but Catachans did things their own way. Sergeant, I heard you burned 100 Tyranids with promethium. That true? More than 100. We turned a storage depot into a crematorium. I looked at her. What's your name, trooper? Rena, Sergeant. Catachan second. Tell me, Rena, what did you do to survive your encounter? She grinned, a death's head expression that would have looked at home on Vess's face. Collapsed a mine shaft on a Trigon. Buried it under 50 meters of rock and watched it suffocate. Took 3 hours to die, but it died. Around the platoon, other soldiers nodded. They all had stories. All had moments where they'd done something desperate, something impossible, something that had worked when it shouldn't have. That's what this platoon is, I said. 30 soldiers who know how to do the impossible, who've killed Tyranids with whatever was available. Promethium, collapsed mines, knives, bare hands. We're going to document every trick, every tactic, every desperate gambit. Then we're going to teach it to the wider Imperium. A Vostroyan with elaborate mustaches cleared his throat. Sergeant, respectfully, the wider Imperium doesn't listen to guardsmen. They listen to officers, nobles, space marines, not survivors like us. Then we'll make them listen, I replied. Colonel Varen has direct authority from Sector Command to develop anti-Tyranid doctrine. That means when we write after-action reports, they don't disappear into archives. They become training manuals. When we develop tactics, they become standard operating procedures. When we survive, we make that survival matter. I could see them processing this, the idea that their experiences, their nightmares and trauma and hard-won knowledge might actually be used, might save others, might mean their suffering had purpose beyond just being another statistic. First training session is at 1400 hours, I continued. Until then, you're dismissed. Get to know your squad mates. Learn their names, their specialties, their stories. Because when we deploy again, and we will deploy again, your survival depends on trusting the soldier beside you. They dispersed with the careful caution of soldiers who'd learned that trust had to be earned. I watched them go, these 30 souls who'd been through hell and somehow made it back. My responsibility now, my burden. Yellen approached as the deck cleared. Sergeant, permission to speak freely? Granted. That was a good speech, honest without being defeatist. Gave them purpose without making promises you can't keep. She paused. But you know most of them won't survive the next deployment, right? Maybe half if we're lucky. I know. And you can live with that. Could I? Could anyone? But that was the job. That was what wearing sergeant's stripes meant. Sending soldiers to die and learning to live with it because the alternative was sending all of them to die. I have to, I said. Same way Harrow did. Same way every sergeant in the Guard does. We make the best decisions we can with the information we have, and we pray to the Emperor that it's enough. She nodded, accepting this. For what it's worth, Sergeant, I'm glad you're the one giving the orders. At least you've proven you can keep people alive when it matters. She walked away before I could respond, leaving me alone on the observation deck. Below, Graia's harvest continued its slow rotation. A dead world now, burned clean of both Imperial and Xenos life. A monument to the Imperium's willingness to destroy what it couldn't save. I thought about the 300 evacuees. Thought about whether their survival justified 6 million deaths. The math didn't work, not by any rational calculation. But that was the 41st millennium for you. A galaxy where saving 300 counted as victory because the alternative was saving none. My Vox bead chirped. Colonel Varen's voice, all platoon leaders to conference room Delta, command briefing in 15 minutes. I headed to the briefing, my mind already cataloging everything we'd learned on Graia's harvest. The way Hormagaunts attacked in waves, sacrificing the first ranks to tire defenders. The way warriors coordinated lesser bioforms through psychic synapses. The way the Carnifex had shrugged off last fire until we'd targeted structural weak points. Lessons written in blood, knowledge purchased with 33 lives. I'd make damn sure that knowledge wasn't wasted. Conference Room Delta was designed for ship's officers, not ground troops. The chairs were too comfortable, the lighting too soft, the whole atmosphere wrong for soldiers who'd spent the last day fighting for their lives. 20 platoon leaders filed in, each one carrying the same weight I felt. Too much responsibility, too little experience, too many ghosts. Colonel Varen stood at the head of the table, a tactical display showing the Graia system glowing behind him. Beside him stood the ultramarine librarian and a woman I didn't recognize, older, wearing the black uniform of the commissariat, her augmetic eye gleaming red in the soft light. Sergeants, Varen began without preamble, this is Commissar Holt and Codicier Thaddeus of the Ultramarines 4th Company. They'll be attached to our regiment as advisors and observers. The Commissar will ensure discipline and morale. The Codicier will provide intelligence on Tyranid psychic tactics. Translation: the Commissar would shoot anyone who broke, and the librarian would make sure we didn't get our minds eaten by the hive mind. Standard operating procedure for a regiment being molded into specialists. You've all been read into the situation, Varen continued. Graia's harvest was not an isolated incident. Naval intelligence has tracked 3 separate Tyranid splinter fleets operating in this sector. Small fleets, maybe a dozen bioships each, but coordinated, testing our defenses, probing for weaknesses. The tactical display shifted, showing fleet movements across multiple systems. Red icons marked Tyranid contacts. Blue icons showed Imperial response forces. There was a lot more red than blue. The hive mind is learning, Caudacier Thaddeus said, his psychic presence making the air feel thick. These splinter fleets are gathering data, testing response times, analyzing defense patterns, cataloging which worlds are worth consuming and which are too costly. Every engagement teaches them more about how we fight. And every engagement teaches us more about how they fight, Commissar Holt added, her voice sharp as a monoblade. That's where you come in. Your regiment will deploy to active Tyranid incursions as rapid response specialists. Your mission is threefold: delay the swarm, gather tactical intelligence, and survive long enough to transmit that intelligence to wider Imperial forces. A Vostroyan sergeant raised his hand. Commissar, with respect, that's not a combat mission. That's a suicide mission with extra steps. The Commissar's augmetic eye focused on him like a targeting laser. Sergeant Kozlov, is it? Tell me, how long did you last against the Tyranids on Gamma Station 7? 16 hours, ma'am. Lost 2/3 of my company. And what did you learn in those 16 hours? Kozlov considered this. That Genostealers can infiltrate through ventilation systems we thought were too small. That they coordinate their attacks during shift changes when defenders are distracted. That they're smart enough to cut power before assaulting. Precisely. And when you transmitted that intelligence, how many other stations adjusted their protocols? 23, according to the after-action report. 23 stations that might have fallen but didn't because you survived long enough to teach them what you'd learned. The Commissar's expression softened slightly. This is not suicide, Sergeant. This is asymmetric warfare. We cannot match the Tyranids in numbers or biomass, but we can outthink them, outadapt them, and ensure that every Imperial soldier learns from the deaths of those who came before. The room fell silent as we processed this. It was the same argument I'd made to my platoon, but hearing it from a commissar gave it weight, authority, the sense that this wasn't just desperation dressed up as strategy. Colonel Varon manipulated the tactical display. Our first deployment is in 72 hours. The agri-world of Harvest End, yes, another agri-world, their priority targets for the swarm, has reported Vanguard organism sightings. Naval intelligence estimates we have a week before the main splinter fleet arrives. We're going in ahead of it. To do what, sir? I asked. Evacuate the population? No. Civilian evacuation is Navy responsibility. We're going in to document the Vanguard organism's behavior patterns, identify synapse creature deployment strategies, and establish optimal defensive positions for when the main fleet arrives. He paused. We're also going to test new anti-Tyranid equipment the Adeptus Mechanicus has developed. Experimental weapons, modified tactics, new doctrines. They're using us as test subjects, another sergeant muttered. They're using us as the Emperor's scalpel, Varon corrected sharply. Every weapon we field test, every tactic we validate, every doctrine we prove or disprove saves lives in future engagements. Yes, it's dangerous. Yes, some of you won't come back. But what you accomplish will echo across this entire sector. Caudacier Thaddeus stepped forward. I will be accompanying the deployment. My presence will help shield you from the worst of the hive mind's psychic pressure. I will also be studying the synapse network structure, looking for vulnerabilities we can exploit. His glowing eyes swept across us. I have seen possible futures where this regiment becomes legendary, where your names are spoken with reverence across 100 worlds. But I have also seen futures where you break, where fear overcomes discipline, where the swarm learns more from your deaths than we learn from your survival. Which future comes to pass, Commissar Holt said, depends on you, on your ability to face the horror without flinching, to kill the unkillable, to stand when standing seems impossible. She drew her bolt pistol, held it up so we could all see the silver acola on its grip. This is my promise to you. I will not execute soldiers for honest fear, for momentary hesitation, for the natural human reaction to facing an enemy that eats worlds. But I will execute cowards who endanger their brothers, who break and run when holding means others might live, who forget that they are Imperial Guard. She holstered the pistol. Don't give me reason to use it. The briefing continued for another hour. Logistics, equipment requisitions, training schedules, tactical doctrines. But my mind kept circling back to one phrase. I have seen possible futures where this regiment becomes legendary. Legendary, like the death corps of Krieg, who charged into certain death with the discipline of machines. Like the Kadishan devils who survived their world's horrors and brought that survival instinct to every battlefield. Like the old Cadian regiments who'd stood at the edge of the Eye of Terror for 10,000 years and never broke. Could we become that? Could 30 platoons of traumatized survivors become something the Imperium remembered? Or would we just be another footnote in the endless casualty reports, our lessons lost in the bureaucratic machinery of the administratum? After the briefing, I found Max and Yellen in the training deck, along with the rest of 1st Platoon. They'd taken my orders seriously, learning names, sharing stories, building the trust that might keep them alive. Rena the Kadishan was demonstrating a knife technique she'd used to kill a Genestealer. A Krieg trooper was explaining the proper way to seal a rebreather when fighting in spore-contaminated environments. They looked up as I entered, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Hope. Not the naive hope of fresh recruits, but the grim, determined hope of survivors who decided they weren't done fighting yet. Sergeant, Rena called out, we've been comparing notes. Want to hear something interesting? Go ahead. Every one of us has killed at least one synapse creature, warriors mostly. A few of us got lictors. One crazy bastard, she gestured to a Talon, killed a hive tyrant with a Lascanon he'd strapped to a cargo hauler. The Talon shrugged. It was die or try something stupid. I chose stupid. Point is, Rena continued, we're not just survivors. We're synapse killers. We know how to identify them, target them, bring them down. That's valuable, right? It was more than valuable. It was exactly the kind of specialized knowledge that could turn a regiment from cannon fodder into precision instruments. Synapse creatures were the swarm's command structure. Kill them and the lesser bioforms reverted to animal instincts. It was the key to fighting Tyranids with limited numbers. That's what we're building, I said. Every trick, every tactic, every desperate gambit that worked. We document it, we test it, we teach it. And when we deploy to Harvest's End, we prove that Guardsmen can do more than just die well. We prove we can win. Even if winning just means surviving, Max asked, especially if winning just means surviving. Because every time we survive, we take knowledge with us. And knowledge is the one thing the Tyranids can't digest. Yellen stepped forward. Sergeant, permission to make a suggestion? Granted. We should compile a field manual. Practical tips for fighting Tyranids, written by survivors for survivors. None of that high Gothic formal doctrine nonsense. Just straight talk about what works and what gets you killed. I considered this. It was good. No, it was better than good. It was exactly the kind of bottom-up innovation that the Imperium's rigid hierarchy usually strangled. But we had Colonel Varen's backing. We had space to try new things. Do it, I said. Get with the other platoons. Collect their tactics, their experiences, their hard-won knowledge. We'll compile it into something useful, something that might actually keep Guardsmen alive. The platoon dispersed to their tasks, and I was left standing in the training deck, watching 30 soldiers who'd been broken by the swarm slowly rebuilding themselves into weapons. Outside, through the viewports, the stars wheeled in eternal silence. Somewhere out there, the Tyranid splinter fleets were moving, consuming, growing stronger. And in 72 hours, we'd meet them again. But this time, we'd be ready. This time, we'd make them remember that humanity didn't go quietly into extinction. This time, we'd show them what the Imperial Guard really meant. The 72 hours passed in a blur of training, planning, and preparation. We drilled with the new equipment the Mechanicus had sent, modified laser guns with higher-powered charge packs designed specifically for punching through Tyranid carapaces, frag grenades with shaped charges that scattered ichor-seeking nanoparticles, even experimental sonic disruptors that supposedly interfered with synapse communication. Whether any of it would work in actual combat remained to be seen. But at least we'd die with better toys. The drop to Harvest's End came at dawn, local time anyway. The planet looked almost identical to Graia's harvest from orbit. Green continents, blue oceans, the patchwork of agricultural fields that fed the Imperium's endless appetite. Beautiful, really, if you didn't know what was coming to eat it. Our Valkyries descended through clear skies while Navy fighters screened us from aerial bioforms. Intelligence said the vanguard organisms were concentrated in the southern continent's agricultural zones, testing the planetary defense forces and gathering reconnaissance for the main fleet. Intelligence was wrong. We were 30 seconds from touchdown when the first gargoyles hit us. Flying tyrannid organisms, each one a winged nightmare of chitin and teeth, they swarmed our Valkyries like angry insects. I heard the pilot screaming evasive maneuvers, felt the transport lurch as something massive slammed into our hull. "Brace!" I shouted, and then we were falling. The Valkyrie hit hard. Not a crash, exactly, but definitely not a controlled landing. The assault ramp blew off from the impact, and we poured out into chaos. Gargoyles filled the sky above us, their flesh borers spitting living ammunition that burrowed into anything it hit. Around us, other Valkyries were landing or crashing, disgorging their cargo of guardsmen into what had become an instant battlefield. "First platoon on me!" I fired my laser gun at the nearest gargoyle, the modified charge pack burning through its wing membrane. It spiraled down, shrieking. "Defensive formation! Get those sonic disruptors active!" My platoon formed up with the discipline of survivors. Not the parade ground precision of Mordians, but the practical efficiency of soldiers who knew hesitation meant death. The Krieg trooper activated our sonic disruptor, and a high-pitched whine cut through the air. Above us, the gargoyles wavered, their formation breaking as the sound interfered with their coordination. "It's working!" Max shouted, firing at the confused bioforms. "The disruption is actually working." Then the ground erupted and hormagaunts boiled up from underground tunnels we hadn't known existed. So much for intelligence reports. "Contact front!" Rena's voice calm despite the horror. "Synapse creature, northwest quadrant." I spotted it, a Tyranid warrior directing the swarm, its four arms gesturing with disturbing intelligence. The hormagaunts were coordinated, hitting us from multiple angles, using the gargoyle attacks as distraction while they closed for melee. "Rena, take your fire team and flank that warrior," I ordered. "Yellen, establish firing line. Max, you're with me. We're going to test these experimental grenades." We moved through practiced chaos, each soldier executing their role. The modified laser guns performed as advertised, punching through chitin armor that would have deflected standard shots. The experimental grenades, well, they exploded, and that was good enough. I armed one, counted down, through. The grenade detonated among a group of hormagaunts, and the ichor-seeking nanoparticles did their job. Anything within 5 meters started dissolving, the particles eating through biological matter like acid. The hormagaunts shrieked and scattered, and I noted the tactic for our field manual. Nano grenades effective against clustered bioforms. Limited use, expensive and supply restricted, but devastating when properly deployed. Rena's fire team reached the warrior and opened up with concentrated less fire. She'd learned from my experience on Graia's harvest. They targeted the joints, the sensory organs, the softer tissue under the arms. The warrior staggered, ichor spraying, and Rena closed the distance with her knife. But this time, she had backup. Her team kept firing, keeping the warrior off balance, while she drove her blade into its skull. The creature dropped, and immediately the hormagaunts around us became less coordinated, their attacks more frenzied, but less effective. "Synapse kill confirmed," Rena reported. "Swarm is fragmenting. All platoons, priority targets are synapse creatures." Colonel Varen's voice over the regimental vox. "Kill the coordinators and the swarm loses cohesion." It was working. By the Emperor, it was actually working. We weren't just dying well. We were fighting effectively, applying the lessons we'd learned, turning our trauma into tactical advantage. A shadow passed over us, and I looked up to see something I'd only heard about in xenology briefings. A hive tyrant, massive and terrible, descending from the clouds on membranous wings. Its psychic presence hit like a hammer, and I felt soldiers around me falter as the hive mind's attention focused on our position. Codashir Thaddeus appeared from somewhere, his psychic hood glowing with defensive power. "Hold!" his voice boomed, amplified by his psychic might. "I shield your minds! Fight on!" The pressure eased slightly, enough that we could function. The hive tyrant landed 50 meters away, and I felt its attention lock onto me specifically. Recognition flared in whatever passed for its consciousness. The hive mind remembered me from Graya's harvest, remembered that I'd cost it more than expected. Now it wanted to correct that mistake. "Heavy weapons!" I screamed. "Priority target!" Lascannons opened fire from fortified positions. Missile launchers streaked toward the tyrant, but it was fast, impossibly fast for something so large, dodging or deflecting shots with movements that seemed to predict where we'd fire before we pulled the trigger. "It's reading our intentions," Thaddeus called out. "It knows what you're going to do before you do it." Then I remembered what the librarian had told me. The Tyranids learned from effective prey. They adapted. They evolved. They anticipated. So don't be predictable. "First platoon!" I grabbed Max and Yellen. "Forget doctrine. Forget training. Do something stupid. Something you wouldn't normally do. Confuse it." They looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. But we didn't have time for sanity. I charged the hive tyrant, not toward cover, not with supporting fire, not with any tactical sense whatsoever. Just a straight sprint at a creature that could kill me with a casual swipe of its talons. It hesitated, just for a moment, because what I was doing made no tactical sense, violated every combat doctrine, was objectively suicidal. In that moment of hesitation, Max threw a nano grenade that hit the tyrant's lower body. The particles began their work, dissolving chitin. The creature shrieked and stumbled. Yellen fired her laser gun at its face. Not the armored crest, but directly into its eyes. Blinded in one eye, the tyrant swung wildly, and a Lascannon shot meant for its center mass instead punched through its thorax where the armor was thinner. Purple ichor fountained. The tyrant staggered, and Codicier Thaddeus appeared in a flash of psychic lightning, his force sword blazing with warp energy, and drove it through the creature's skull. The hive tyrant fell, and I felt something break in the swarm's cohesion, a psychic scream that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. Then silence. Not actual silence, but a sudden absence of coordination. The bioforms around us were still attacking, but now they fought as animals, not as a unified organism. "Push forward!" Colonel Varen's voice. "All units, advance and exploit! This is what victory looks like!" We pushed forward through the chaos, killing bioforms that no longer fought with unified purpose. By mid-afternoon, we'd secured the landing zone and established a perimeter. By evening, we'd linked up with the Planetary Defense Forces and begun evacuating civilians. And I was still alive, still breathing, still carrying the weight of command. First platoon rallied around me as the sun set over Harvest's End. We'd lost 4 soldiers, a Vostroyan, 2 Catechins, and the Krieg trooper who'd operated our sonic disruptor. But 26 had survived. Better than 90% survival rate on a hot landing against an active swarm. That would have been considered impossible a week ago. "We did it," Max said quietly, staring at the battlefield littered with dead Tyranids. "We actually did it." "We did what Harrow taught us," I replied. "We stood. We fought. And we made them pay for every meter." Yellen was already compiling notes for our field manual. Sonic disruptors effective against aerial bioforms. Nano grenades devastating but expensive. Modified lace guns significantly improve penetration. Unpredictable tactics confuse synapse creature predictions. Psychic shielding essential when facing hive tyrants. Lessons written in blood, but this time written in Xenos blood as much as our own. I looked at my platoon, battered, exhausted but unbroken, and felt something I hadn't felt since Cadia fell. Pride. The campaign on Harvest's End lasted another 6 days. 6 days of fighting the vanguard organisms while civilians evacuated. 6 days of testing equipment, refining tactics, and proving that the Imperium could do more than just die heroically against the Tyranids. We could actually hurt them. Could make them hesitate. Could teach them that humanity was prey with teeth. On the seventh day, the main splinter fleet arrived in system, and we withdrew to orbit. Behind us, Harvest's End prepared for the real invasion. But now they had our tactical data, our field-tested equipment, and most importantly, our survival to prove it could be done. The endurance of Terra took us aboard once more, and this time I watched the planet below with different eyes. Not defeat, not another world lost to the Great Devourer, but a world that would fight smarter because of what we'd taught them. Colonel Varen assembled the regiment in the main hangar bay. 600 guardsmen who'd deployed to Harvest's End, 543 who'd returned. Better than 90% survival rate, unprecedented for operations against Tyranid vanguard forces. The Imperium has taken notice, Varen announced, his voice carrying across the assembled soldiers. Our tactics, our equipment modifications, our field manual, all of it is being distributed across the sector. The 114th Cadian has become the template for rapid response anti-Tyranid operations. He paused and I saw pride in his scarred face. Not the empty pride of parade grounds, but the real thing, earned through blood and survival. Sergeant Deal, front and center. I stepped forward, my heart hammering, in front of the entire regiment. What had I done wrong? What had I, for exceptional leadership under fire, for tactical innovation that saved Imperial lives, and for personally engaging a hive tyrant with nothing but a laser gun and insane courage? He pinned something to my chest, a medal I didn't recognize. A silver aquila with a stylized Tyranid skull beneath it. You are hereby awarded the Star of Terra and promoted to lieutenant. You'll be taking command of a company. The regiment erupted in cheers, actual cheers from soldiers who'd seen too much death to celebrate lightly. I stood frozen, processing what had just happened. Lieutenant, company commander, responsible for 300 souls instead of 30. Sir, I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep doing what you've been doing, Varen replied quietly, so only I could hear. Keep thinking like a survivor instead of like a parade ground officer. Keep teaching your soldiers to do the impossible. Keep making the Xenos remember that humans don't go quietly. Yes, sir. I will, sir. Later in the officers' quarters, I now shared with the other company commanders. I sat alone with my thoughts. The metal felt heavy on my chest. Not physically, it was just metal, but symbolically. Every guardsman who died on Graia's harvest had contributed to earning it. Every lesson written in blood. Every sacrifice that taught me how to keep others alive. A knock on the door. Max entered. He'd been promoted to corporal, would be taking over first platoon in my absence. Lieutenant, he said, testing the title awkwardly. That's amazing, sir. You earned it. We all earned it. Every one of us who stood on Graia's harvest, who held that depot, who burned the swarm. I looked at him, this boy who'd aged a lifetime in a week. You're going to do fine as a platoon leader, Max. You've already proven you can stand when it matters. I learned from the best, sir. He paused. Do you think we're actually making a difference? Or are we just dying slower than expected? It was the same question I'd asked myself a dozen times. The same question every guardsman asked when they looked at the endless war and tried to find meaning in their small part of it. I think every time we survive, we deny the Tyranids their victory. Every time we teach others what we've learned, we multiply our effectiveness across the Imperium. Every time we stand when we should fall, we prove that humanity is more than just biomass to be consumed. I met his eyes. Is that making a difference? I don't know, but it's the best we can do, and that has to be enough. He nodded slowly. For Cadia, for Harrow, for Vess and Coleman, and everyone who died teaching us how to live. We carry them with us, Corporal Max, in our tactics, our training, our refusal to give up. That's how we honor them. After he left, I stood at the viewport and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, the Tyranid hive fleets continued their advance. Somewhere, Imperial worlds were dying, their populations consumed, their biomass recycled into more of the swarm. The war would continue, might continue forever for all I knew, but we'd proven something on Harvest's End. Proven that humanity could adapt, could learn, could fight the Great Devourer, on terms that didn't end in inevitable extinction. We'd shown that even against an enemy that ate worlds, individual courage and tactical innovation still mattered. I thought about Sergeant Harrow charging a Carnifex with grenades, about Vest driving her knife into a warrior's skull, about 38 guardsmen holding a depot against impossible odds and buying time for others to escape, about the choice to burn rather than be eaten, to deny the enemy their victory even if it cost us everything. That was what it meant to be a guardsman facing Tyranids. Not winning? We'd probably never truly win, but standing anyway, fighting anyway, surviving anyway, and teaching the next generation how to do the same. The Imperium had 10,000 ways to die, but we'd found at least one way to live, together, defiant, and absolutely refusing to go quietly into extinction. I touched the metal on my chest, cold metal that represented hot blood, and made a silent promise to every soldier I'd ever fought beside. I would keep standing, keep fighting, keep teaching others how to survive. And when my time finally came, when the swarm or the heretics or the endless war claimed me at last, I'd die knowing I'd made the Imperium's enemies pay for every second of my life. That was the only immortality a guardsman could hope for. Not statues or remembrances, but the knowledge that our deaths taught the living how to survive. The Emperor protects, they say, but sometimes the Emperor needed his guardsmen to protect each other, to be the shields that bought time, to be the teachers who turned trauma into doctrine, to be the stubborn bastards who refused to die until we taught everyone else how to live. I was Lieutenant Corvus Deal of the 114th Cadian Shock Troops. I'd faced the Great Devourer and survived, and I'd spend every day of my remaining life making sure that survival mattered. For the Emperor, for Cadia, for every guardsman who stood when standing was impossible. We don't break, we don't run, we hold the line. And when the darkness comes, and it always comes, we make them remember that humanity fights back,